You did what? My voice cracked as I stared at Carol across the kitchen table, my stomach twisting into knots. She didn't even flinch. Her manicured nails tapped rhythmically on the coffee mug she held, her expression calm, too calm. I used it for the wedding, she said, shrugging as though we were discussing pocket change. Luke needed help with the costs, and it's family money. You'll get over it. Family money, I echoed, my voice rising. That was my money. I worked 2 years waiting tables to save for college, Carol. You said you'd invest it for me. And I did, she said, her tone sharper now. I invested it in something important. Your brother's wedding. Her son. Not my brother. Luke wasn't even pretending to care about the fallout. As far as he was concerned, his dream wedding, with its extravagant venue and flower arrangements that probably cost more than my tuition, was far more valuable than anything I could have planned for myself. My blood boiled, but before I could respond, my father walked into the room, coffee in hand. What's all this yelling about? He asked, his eyes darting between us. Ask Carol, I snapped. She spent my college savings on Luke's wedding. My name is Emma Williams, and I'm 19 years old. For as long as I can remember, my stepmother, Carol, has been the dominant force in our house. My mom passed away when I was 10, and by the time my father remarried, I was desperate for some version of normalcy. But Carol made it clear early on that her priorities were her biological son, Luke, and herself. I became an afterthought, someone to nod at during dinner, but not worth investing in. When I got my first job at 16, I started saving immediately. Every tip, every extra shift, went into my college fund. I wanted to go to a local university and study nursing, a dream my mom had shared for me. Carol always talked a big game about financial responsibility, so when she suggested I let her invest my savings to grow it, I believed her. I thought I could trust her. I was wrong. I don't understand, my dad said, scratching his head as Carol breezed past him, clearly done with the conversation. Why didn't you tell me? I didn't know until now, I said, my voice trembling. She said she'd invest the money for me, but she spent it all on Luke's wedding. He frowned, but I could see the conflict in his eyes. He hated confrontation, and Carol knew it. I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding, he said weakly. Let me talk to her. A misunderstanding? I said, my voice rising. Dad, she admitted it. She doesn't even think she did anything wrong. My father didn't have an answer. He muttered something about needing to get to work and disappeared upstairs, leaving me alone in the kitchen with the weight of my stepmother's betrayal pressing down on me. She had stolen my future, and my father was too spineless to stand up to her. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my anger turned into resolve. I wasn't going to let her get away with this. That money was mine, and if my father wouldn't fight for me, I'd fight for myself. The next morning, I called a local lawyer whose name I found on a flyer at the library. I need to know if there's anything I can do, I told him, explaining the situation. It's my savings. I worked for it. Can I get it back? Possibly, he said, his voice calm and professional. If you can prove the money was yours and that she used it without your consent, you have a case. But it won't be easy. Are you prepared to go to court? I hesitated. Taking my stepmother to court felt drastic, but what choice did I have? Carol wasn't going to admit she was wrong, and my father clearly wasn't going to intervene. Yes, I said firmly, I'm prepared. When I told my father about the lawsuit, he was horrified. Emma, do you really want to do this? He asked, pacing the living room. It's just going to cause more tension in the family. She already caused tension, I shot back. Dad, she stole from me. This isn't about family, it's about what's right. His shoulders slumped, and for a moment I thought he might side with me. But then Carol walked in, her face a mask of irritation. So, what's the plan, Emma? She sneered. You're going to drag your family through the mud over a few $1,000s? Real mature? It's not just a few $1,000s, I said, my voice shaking but steady. It's my future. And I won't let you take that from me. Her lips curled into a smirk. Do what you have to do, sweetheart. You won't win. That was the moment I knew there was no turning back. Carol thought she could intimidate me into backing down, but she underestimated just how far I was willing to go. With the lawyer's help, I filed the lawsuit and started gathering evidence, bank statements, pay stubs, anything that proved the money was mine. It wasn't just about the $8,000 anymore. It was about standing up for myself, about refusing to let someone else dictate my worth. Carol had stolen more than my savings. She'd stolen my trust. And I was determined to get it back. Filing the lawsuit against Carol felt like stepping into uncharted territory. I wasn't just taking on my stepmother. I was taking on the fragile balance of my family. My father avoided me more than ever, retreating to his workshop whenever I was home. Carol, on the other hand, went out of her way to antagonize me. She'd leave passive-aggressive notes on the fridge like, maybe save up again, third time's the charm, or make snide comments when we crossed paths. But no matter how hard she pushed, I refused to budge. The court date was set for 3 months later, giving me just enough time to prepare my case. My lawyer, Mr. Peterson, was a patient man in his late 40s who specialized in small claims disputes. "We'll need more than just your word," he said during one of our meetings. "The key is proving that the money was yours, and that Carol used it without your consent. Do you have any records of your savings or a written agreement about the investment?" "I have bank statements showing deposits from my job," I said, pulling a folder from my bag. "And I wrote her a note when I gave her the money, asking her to invest it. It's not a formal agreement, but it's something." He nodded, flipping through the documents. "It's a good start. I'll subpoena her financial records. If she spent the money on the wedding, it should show up in her accounts." The weeks leading up to the trial were tense. My father barely spoke to me, and when he did, it was always to question my decision. "Emma," he said one evening, standing awkwardly in the doorway of my room, "do you really want to go through with this? Carol's furious, and you know how she is when she's angry." "She's furious because she got caught," I replied, not looking up from my laptop. "And yes, Dad, I'm going through with it. She stole from me." He sighed heavily, running a hand through his thinning hair. I don't want this to tear the family apart." I looked at him then, anger bubbling to the surface. "She already tore it apart when she decided I didn't matter, Dad. This isn't my fault, it's hers." He didn't have an answer for that, and he left without another word. Despite the tension at home, I found solace in my friends. They rallied around me, helping me stay focused when doubt crept in. "You're doing the right thing," my best friend Lily said during one of our late-night coffee runs. "She had no right to take your money, and she deserves to face the consequences." "But what if I lose?" I asked, voicing the fear that had been gnawing at me since the beginning. "What if the court sides with her?" "You won't lose," Lily said firmly. "You've worked too hard for this, and even if it doesn't go your way, you're standing up for yourself. That's what matters." Her words gave me strength on the days when the weight of it all felt unbearable. The lawsuit wasn't just about the $8,000 anymore. It was about reclaiming my voice and proving that I wouldn't be silenced or overlooked. As the court date approached, my lawyer uncovered a surprising lead. Among the financial records he subpoenaed, there were inconsistencies in Carol's spending. Large withdrawals had been made from a joint account she shared with my father, but the money hadn't just gone to Luke's wedding. It appeared Carol had been funneling money into a personal account for years, using it for luxury items and trips my father knew nothing about. "This changes things," Mr. Peterson said during our final meeting before the trial. "This isn't just about your savings anymore. If we present this evidence, it could expose a pattern of financial mismanagement." The revelation left me reeling. I'd always known Carol was self-serving, but this was on another level. I debated whether to include the new evidence in the trial. On one hand, it strengthened my case. On the other, it would likely devastate my father. "I don't know if I can do this to him," I admitted to Lily the night before the hearing. "It's going to break him." "Emma, he deserves to know the truth," Lily said gently. "He's been living in her shadow for too long. Maybe this is what he needs to wake up. The morning of the trial, I sat in the courtroom feeling like I was carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders. Carol sat across the room, her lawyer whispering in her ear. She looked as calm and polished as ever, her perfectly styled hair and expensive jewelry making her seem untouchable. My father sat beside her, his expression a mixture of confusion and unease. He didn't even look at me. When the judge entered and the trial began, I forced myself to focus on the facts. My lawyer presented my bank statements, the note I'd written to Carol, and records showing her extravagant spending. "The evidence is clear," Mr. Peterson said as he addressed the court. "The defendant used my client's savings without her consent, prioritizing her personal interests over the well-being of her stepdaughter." Carol's lawyer tried to argue that the money had been given to her willingly, but when Mr. Peterson presented the subpoenaed financial records, the courtroom fell silent. The withdrawals from my father's accounts, the luxury purchases, everything was laid bare. I glanced at my father as the evidence was read aloud. His face paled and he leaned back in his chair, his eyes wide with disbelief. Carol, for the first time, looked rattled. When it was my turn to speak, I addressed the judge directly. "That money was my future," I said, my voice steady despite the lump in my throat. I trusted Carol to help me grow it, but instead, she took it for herself. "This isn't just about the $8,000. It's about the principle. I deserve justice, and I deserve to be heard." As I sat down, I felt a surge of determination. Whatever the outcome, I knew I had done everything in my power to stand up for myself. The courtroom was electric with tension as the judge leaned forward, reviewing the evidence my lawyer had presented. The weight of what had just been revealed, Carol's years of siphoning money from my father's accounts, hung heavy in the air. For the first time since the trial began, Carol looked genuinely uncomfortable, her usual air of superiority replaced by a tight-lipped expression of worry. My father, on the other hand, looked shattered. "Mrs. Williams," the judge said, her voice firm, "it's clear from the evidence presented that you used Miss Williams' savings without her consent, despite claiming otherwise. More concerning is the pattern of financial mismanagement demonstrated by these withdrawals from joint family accounts." Carol's lawyer scrambled to respond, offering weak defenses about family dynamics and shared responsibility. But the judge wasn't swayed. She held up the financial records as if to emphasize the undeniable facts. "This isn't just a case of poor communication or misunderstanding. It's a breach of trust." I glanced at my father. He was sitting rigidly, staring straight ahead, his face pale. I could see the betrayal sinking in, each new revelation cutting deeper than the last. When it was Carol's turn to speak, she tried to regain her composure. "Your Honor," she began, her voice carefully measured, "this has all been blown out of proportion. I only used Emma's savings because I thought it would benefit the family. My son's wedding was a significant event, and—" "You spent $8,000 on your son's wedding while claiming it was an investment for Miss Williams," the judge interrupted sharply. "And the additional evidence shows you've been withdrawing substantial sums for personal expenses unrelated to the family's welfare. Do you honestly believe this is defensible?" Carol faltered, her practiced facade cracking for the first time. I didn't mean for it to—" "Enough," the judge said, cutting her off. "This case is about more than just money. It's about accountability, Mrs. Williams, and your actions show a clear pattern of selfishness and disregard for the trust placed in you." As the judge prepared to deliver her verdict, my heart pounded. I hadn't dared to hope for this level of validation, but now it felt within reach. When she finally spoke, her words were like a weight lifting off my chest. "In light of the evidence, I'm ruling in favor of the plaintiff, Miss Williams," the judge declared. "Mrs. Williams is ordered to repay the $8,000 in full, with interest, within 60 days. Furthermore, I recommend a review of the defendant's financial dealings to ensure no further improprieties have occurred." A hush fell over the courtroom. Carol's face hardened, her lips pressing into a thin line. My father's head dropped into his hands, as if the full extent of his wife's betrayal had finally sunk in. I exhaled, relief washing over me. The money itself wasn't the only victory. It was the recognition of what I'd endured, the validation that I wasn't just some silly, overly dramatic teenager. I'd been wronged, and now everyone knew it. As we left the courtroom, Carol shot me a glare, her voice low and venomous as she hissed, "You'll regret this, Emma." But I didn't flinch. For the first time in years, I felt stronger than her. "No, Carol," I said, meeting her gaze head-on. "You'll regret underestimating me." My father caught up with me in the hallway, his face lined with exhaustion and regret. "Emma," he began, his voice faltering, "I didn't know. I had no idea she was—" "You didn't want to know," I interrupted, my tone sharp but not unkind. "You looked the other way because it was easier than confronting her. But this is what happens when you ignore the truth." He nodded slowly, his shoulders slumping. "You're right. I failed you. And I'm sorry." It wasn't the heartfelt apology I'd always dreamed of, but it was a start. For the first time, I saw my father not as the passive figure who had let me down, but as a man grappling with the consequences of his choices. It didn't excuse what had happened, but it gave me a sense of closure I hadn't expected. As I walked out of the courthouse, the sun was shining, the weight of the trial finally behind me. The battle had been long and painful, but I'd stood up for myself and won. Carol's actions were exposed for what they were, and my father's blind loyalty to her had been shaken. I glanced at my phone, where a text from Lily lit up the screen. "You did it? Drinks on me tonight?" Smiling, I typed back, "Absolutely." The fight wasn't just about the money, it was about reclaiming my agency, proving to myself that I had the strength to demand what I deserved. And now, with the verdict in my favor, I could finally move forward. The days after the trial felt surreal. The $8,000 was officially mine again, though Carol's begrudging compliance with the court order made it clear this wasn't over for her. She returned home in icy silence, avoiding both my father and me at every opportunity. It was strange to see her so subdued, her usual dominance replaced by a simmering resentment. But for once, she wasn't calling the shots, and that was enough for me. My father, on the other hand, seemed lost. I caught him in the living room one evening, staring blankly at a pile of Carol's financial records that had come to light during the trial. "She lied to me," he said softly, almost to himself. "All these years, and I didn't see it." I sat down across from him, unsure what to say. "You trusted her," I said finally. "That's not a crime, Dad. But ignoring what she was doing, that hurt me." He looked up at me then, his eyes heavy with regret. "I should have stood up for you," he admitted. "I should have listened." For a moment I wanted to lash out, to tell him exactly how much his silence had cost me, but instead, I just nodded. "You still can," I said, "by making sure nothing like this happens again." Carol moved out a week later, taking her smirking sense of entitlement with her. She left a curt note on the kitchen counter. "I'll let you know where to send the rest of my things." My father didn't say much about her departure, but there was a new stillness in the house that I found comforting. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to walk on eggshells in my own home. Luke, predictably, stayed silent. Whether he didn't know how to confront the truth of his mother's actions or simply didn't care, I never heard a word of apology from him. Part of me wanted closure, but another part realized I didn't need it. I'd fought my battle and won. That was enough. I threw myself into planning for college, finally able to see a path forward. The $8,000 wasn't just money, it was proof that I had taken control of my future. I started researching programs, comparing costs, and figuring out how to stretch every dollar. For the first time in months, I felt excited, hopeful. My father offered to help. "I can't make up for what happened," he said one evening as I worked through an application. "But I want to support you however I can." I hesitated, unsure if I could trust his offer after everything. But then I saw the sincerity in his face. He was trying, and that mattered. "Thank you, Dad," I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. In the quiet moments, I thought about what the trial had taught me, not just about Carol or my father, but about myself. I'd always been the quiet one, the one who avoided conflict and tried to keep the peace. But standing up to Carol had shown me that I was stronger than I'd ever given myself credit for. I wasn't just the girl who worked nights as a waitress or the forgotten stepdaughter. I was someone who could demand what she deserved and fight for her future. And that future was just beginning. A few months later, I stood outside my dorm building, staring up at the red brick walls that would house my next chapter. It felt surreal to finally be here, ready to start college after everything I'd been through. My dad had insisted on helping me move in, and I let him, though he spent most of the time apologizing for carrying boxes the wrong way. For the first time in a long time, his nervous energy didn't irritate me. It felt genuine. "Are you sure you don't need anything else?" he asked for the 5th time, hovering by the door as I unpacked. "I'm good, Dad," I said with a smile. "Thanks for everything." He hesitated, then nodded. "I'm proud of you, Emma. You've worked so hard for this." Hearing those words made my chest tighten. They didn't erase the past, but they showed me that he was trying, and that meant something. As I settled into my new routine, I realized just how much had changed. College was everything I'd dreamed it would be, challenging, exciting, and full of possibility. Every class, every conversation with a professor or peer felt like a step toward the life I'd been fighting for. And every time I opened a textbook I'd bought with my own money, I felt a surge of pride. This was my accomplishment, and no one could take it away from me. Back home, things were quieter. Carol was gone for good, and my dad was slowly learning to navigate life without her. We weren't as close as I might have hoped, but we were rebuilding something. He called every Sunday to check in, and I appreciated his effort more than I ever thought I would. As for Carol and Luke, they faded into the background of my life, their importance shrinking with each passing day. I didn't need their validation, nor did I waste time waiting for an apology that would never come. I'd already gotten what I needed: my independence, my sense of self, and my future. One weekend, Lily came to visit, and we sat on a bench near campus, drinking overpriced coffee and laughing about the ridiculousness of dorm life. "You're killing it, Emma," she said, bumping my shoulder. "After everything that happened, you're still standing. And not just standing, you're thriving." Her words stuck with me. For so long, I'd been defined by what others thought of me: Carol's dismissiveness, my father's inaction, even Luke's indifference. But now, for the first time, I wasn't living in their shadow. I was carving my own path, and it felt incredible. As I walked back to my dorm that evening, the campus buzzing with life around me, I thought about the girl I'd been a year ago, hesitant, uncertain, and too afraid to stand up for herself. That girl was gone. In her place was someone stronger, more confident, and ready to take on whatever came next. This wasn't just a resolution to a chapter. It was the beginning of something new. My life was mine, and I was finally ready to live it.
Hello, welcome to the channel Wise Stories. Enjoy watching.
"You can go home," the gray-haired man in the white uniform smiled. Aglaia smiled tiredly and began to put her stuff in her bag. The trauma doctor immersed himself in paperwork, allowing the nurse to finally go home. Her shift had ended an hour and a half ago, but hospital work ended not by the clock, but when there was an opportunity to finish a shift. The petite, beautiful nurse with shoulder-length hair said goodbye to her colleague and started to go downstairs when suddenly someone called out to her. "Aglaia, I've been looking for you everywhere. There's a man waiting for you for 2 hours. We told him that you were helping the doctor, that people were delivered after the car accident and there was a lot of work to do, but he still decided to wait for you," the receptionist told her. "Okay, thank you." Aglaia was confused. Waiting for 2 hours? Who could it be? Only one option came to her mind: it could only be Cassiano. Maybe he's come to his senses and decided to come back? That thought made her soul feel warm. Aglaia ran down the stairs and saw a man in the reception area, blonde hair, tall, slim, dark skin. He was wearing a simple black t-shirt and pants. That's not Cassiano. Aglaia pressed her lips together unhappily, sighed, and headed towards him. She recognized him. The man's name was Alejandro. Recently, he was admitted to their hospital after a car accident, and Aglaia took a big part in saving his life. She had a day shift, and then replaced her colleague on the night shift. Her colleague's father was seriously ill, and the girl couldn't leave him alone. Finally, both shifts were over, and exhausted Aglaia was going home with only one wish: to get some sleep. Halfway home, she saw an accident. A drunken truck driver hit a passenger car. Thoughts of exhaustion and sleep immediately evaporated. Aglaia rushed to the car, opened the door, and saw a man inside. He was unconscious. There was no one around. Aglaia dragged him away from the car, laid him down on the sidewalk, and dialed the hospital's number. The ambulance rushed to the scene, while the girl tried to bring the man to his senses. Just as he opened his eyes, his car exploded. The drunken truck driver walked around, apologizing profusely. Aglaia referred the injured man to her hospital, to her trauma unit, and 2 days later, she met him again. They developed quite a warm, friendly relationship. They talked a lot and discussed their favorite movies and music. The guy stayed there for a week and tried to give her money when he was about to be discharged. But Aglaia didn't take the money, as always, and even felt offended. So they said goodbye to each other in an awkward way, and now this guy's been waiting here for 2 hours. Maybe he wants to ask her out on a date. Aglaia shivered. He was nice, but she wasn't ready for a relationship right now. She'd just gone through a painful divorce. It had only been 3 months since a new mark had appeared on her passport. "Good afternoon," he said. "Hello, Alejandro. How are you doing? Did the headaches go away?" Aglaia asked. "I'm fine, thank you. Thanks to your help, I'm recovering very quickly. I've been waiting for you. I really need to talk to you. Let's go to the cafe. It won't take long." Aglaia shrugged and agreed. Lately, the walls of her home felt like a prison to her, so she was in no hurry to get there. They were sitting in a cafe that was usually crowded, but today there were only staff in yellow aprons. Small round tables, uncomfortable chairs. Alejandro ordered coffee and a dessert for Aglaia, and only black tea for himself. "Aglaia, I invited you here because I need your help. I'm not the kind of guy who has a lot of female friends. I'm shy enough, and it's hard for me to meet new people. Me and my ex broke up in a pretty bad way, so I can't ask her for such an unusual favor. But for some reason, I felt like I could trust you, so I thought I'd ask you. You saved my life and cured me." The guy was nervous, and his blonde bangs were getting in his eyes. "I didn't do anything special, that's my job. You don't owe me anything. What's the request?" Aglaia wanted to leave. This whole thing felt weird and awkward. This guy could hardly offer her anything that would interest her. "Don't be so modest. You got me out of the car, and then it exploded. But I've learned my lesson, and I won't offer you money ever again, I promise. But my request will be something very personal and strange. I'll tell you all about it, and you just tell me if you agree or not. I won't insist. If you say no, I won't bother you again. So, I need a fake wedding. I'd like you to be my wife for a while. It may take a few months, but after that, we will divorce." Aglaia lowered her head. Divorce? She's definitely not gonna survive another divorce. Why do you need this? She didn't know how to refuse him politely. "Don't worry, it's not some machinations, nothing dirty or illegal. Except for a sham marriage, apparently." The guy shook his head, took her hand, and looked into her eyes. "I promise I won't molest you. There won't be any intimacy. All I want is publicity. I need everyone to know that I got married. I can pay for it, any sum of money. But I really need it urgently. I can't give you all the details, it'll be too boring. It's a bureaucratic necessity, nothing more. Aglaia thought about it. He needs the publicity. So her ex will find out that she got married 3 months after the divorce. Awesome. At least she'd get back at him for everything. After all, she has nothing to lose. What could be worse than the lifestyle she was living now? Aglaia raised her eyes and looked at her interlocutor through thick dark lashes. I agree, and no need to pay for that. Alejandro smiled. Do you really agree? You can't imagine how grateful I am. This is the second time you're saving me. Then from now on, you can tell everyone that we're a couple. It's important that everyone believes it. I promise you won't regret the decision to help me. Soon Alejandro said goodbye to the girl, paid the waiter, and left. Aglaia slowly finished her coffee and left. On the way home, she thought that now at least something would start to happen in her life. It was important to her. The emptiness she felt when she was alone frightened her. Aglaia climbed the stairs to the second floor, opened the door, and entered. It was warm and quiet inside. It was always hot in the apartment in summer, but this year August had been extremely cool because of a cyclone. The weather forecasters had promised that summer would return in September, but for now, the temperature would be relatively cold. She sat on the sofa, her glance focused on the picture on the nightstand. It showed her in a wedding dress and her ex-husband, Cassiano. They were smiling. Weren't you happy with me? She asked aloud. She still remembered Cassiano begging her to marry him. Cassiano was her classmate. Aglaia hadn't noticed him at school, but when they both graduated and met by chance on the street, they looked at each other in a completely different way. Cassiano confessed that he loved her during their school years. But Aglaia noticed the guy only now. In high school, he was an unattractive, shy guy, but now he had completely changed. He had everything: a good sense of humor, charisma, good manners, beautiful eyes, and a smile. She thought that such a guy could not be single, and Cassiano told her that he had just broken up with his girlfriend. They were preparing for their wedding when she cheated on him with her best friend. He saw it and left. Cassiano moved to a big city because of that girl, but when he saw her in the arms of another guy, he just packed up, and 18 hours later, he was already in his provincial hometown. Cassiano wooed her nicely, but Aglaia thought he was just trying to forget the girl who cheated on him. Cassiano said he was madly in love with her and that the past was left behind. They had a whirlwind romance and soon, he proposed to her. Aglaia was over the moon. They got married. The wedding was incredibly beautiful and fun. They invited all their friends and relatives. But soon the problems began. Right after the wedding, Aglaia started trying to get pregnant, and her husband was happy about it. He said he wanted 4 children. It didn't work, no matter how many times they tried. Doctors mentioned a possible incompatibility. Many doctors examined them in different clinics, but all of them said that they were both healthy. But at the last clinic they went to, Aglaia was told she would probably never have children. In this clinic, the girl underwent a thorough examination, and the doctors identified several problems. She underwent treatment, and she prayed, but nothing helped. During the second year of marriage, the relationship with Cassiano began to deteriorate. He didn't say it directly, but it was clear that the problem was his wife's infertility. The man dreamed of a large family, and with Aglaia it was impossible. Aglaia had already realized that there was no future for them, but they were still in love. They didn't dare to just break up, they simply left things as they were. In the third year of their marriage, Aglaia noticed that Cassiano started coming home late. He smelled of the same women's perfume, and there were traces of lipstick on his shirt collar. She understood what was going on, but didn't dare to talk about it. She began to ask direct questions only in the 4th year of marriage. She knew he had another woman. And he lied to Aglaia, looking her in the eye, but he didn't dare to divorce her. She didn't understand why he wasn't divorcing her, but didn't dare to take that irrevocable step either. Deep in her heart, she hoped that things would get better, that he would come to his senses and break up with his mistress. She wanted to adopt a child and even attended foster parenting classes, but soon Cassiano decided to leave her. It was a week before the 5th anniversary of their marriage. He came home from work and started packing his clothes into the suitcase. "A business trip?" she asked, standing in the doorway. "No. I'm leaving you." Aglaia made a puzzled expression on her face. "Where will you go?" she asked. "To her. I've always loved her, you knew that. She even moved here from another city so we could see each other more often. We dated secretly for a few years, and now she's expecting my baby. And I can't tear myself between two women. I have to be with her. I hope you will understand me." It was only then that Aglaia realized how stupid it was to believe in a miracle. He was in love with another woman from the very beginning. She saw it, but she didn't want to believe her eyes. She wanted to cry and burst into hysterics, but only smiled and said, "Be happy." Cassiano shook his head disappointedly. Apparently, he expected tears, tantrums, pleading. But Aglaia behaved with dignity. She helped him pack and said she would file for divorce herself. He said he was in no hurry. They just lived together for now. As soon as the front door slammed behind Cassiano, she sank to the floor and let the tears flow. Now Aglaia looked at their wedding picture and remembered how painful it had been for her. She took a vacation and stayed at home for a week watching TV. She watched motivational movies and tried to fight stress with cake. Aglaia loved kiwi cake. It was cheap, low-calorie, and very delicious. During that week, she got 3 extra kilos because not only did she eat diet cake, but she almost didn't get out of bed. However, on the 7th day, she felt better. She was proud of herself for surviving this period without alcohol. When she was younger, she had a habit of drinking wine in case of any minor problem. But now she was wiser and listened not to her heart but to her mind. He left her, that's fine. Life's not over. She began to exercise, lost weight, and didn't even let herself think that he would come back. Yes, they enjoyed their time together, but it was in the past. It doesn't matter anymore who was wrong or who was right. There are only facts. They are no longer together. That night, Aglaia couldn't find the strength to eat or take a shower. The memories made her sad. She felt exhausted and fell asleep. At night she woke up feeling cold. She closed the window, crawled under the blanket, and slept until morning. A week later, when the nurse was still at work, she got a call from Alejandro. "Hello, my love. How about going out to dinner tonight?" he asked. Aglaia understood that probably he wasn't alone and the comedy had already begun, or he was just practicing his acting skills. But still, it was weird to hear the words "my love." Although, it wasn't any different than the relationship with Cassiano. He also called her "my love" for years without loving her. "Hi, sweetie," she smiled. Alejandro smiled on the other end of the phone as well. He was standing in the room and an elderly married couple, his parents, were sitting behind him. "How about we have dinner tonight? I finally told my parents about us and they want to meet you." Aglaia was confused. "With your parents? So soon? Isn't it too soon?" she asked. "Come on, sweetie. It's just a formality. Don't take it so seriously. Don't worry, everyone will like you. Let's have dinner and decide everything." That evening Aglaia came to the restaurant, right after her work shift where she gave lots of injections to the patients. Aglaia spent the entire day taking care of others, comforting them, and trying to cheer people up. After all, a positive mindset is half of success in the medical field. She barely had time to take a shower and change to go to the meeting with Alejandro. Her makeup was simple and her hair was loose. The short hair curled a little, showing her long and beautiful neck. There was no time to style her hair. She'd forgotten to put on her earrings and was worried about it all the way there. "Hi. You look stunning," Alejandro said. Aglaia thought she looked pathetic in her cheap dress, and Alejandro said that just to cheer her up. "I haven't had time to do anything. I just finished my shift. I'm a nurse, if you remember, and I can't spend all day at the beauty salons. I hope you understand. Alejandro frowned humorously. You don't need any beauty salons. And I was telling the truth, you're really beautiful. If it were not for the circumstances, I would have fallen in love with you already, he said honestly and immediately blushed. Aglaia smiled, so his words were true. Lies wouldn't make him blush. So, meeting your parents? That's right. And one more thing, I'm going to propose to you today. Later, the waiter will bring us 2 rings. This moment will be filmed. I needed to make my parents believe it. Are you ready? Just be natural. I'll do my best. They had dinner, and the waiter brought the ring on a large silver tray. Alejandro dropped to one knee in front of her, and Aglaia smiled. Suddenly, her and Cassiano's life flashed before Aglaia's eyes. The moment when Cassiano had proposed to her, the way he had looked into her eyes, promised her eternal love, and she immediately thought of how it had ended. Tears came to her eyes. Alejandro saw the change in her mood. I love you and I want us to be together always and forever. Will you marry me? I love you too. Aglaia hugged him, hiding her tears. Yes. I'll marry you. She could barely pull herself together. He was hugging her for real, trying to comfort her. A man with a camera stood behind them, blinding them with flashes. Aglaia took a deep breath and wiped away her tears. She was smiling. Alejandro was smiling too, but his eyes showed that he was worried. He put the ring on her finger. It was a beautiful gold ring with a stone that fit perfectly. They finished the ceremony and left the restaurant. Aglaia thought that now he would leave, and she would go home and have time to walk and clear her head. But a handsome blond man in a suit suggested to take a walk. They walked down a night city street lit by lanterns. Alejandro took her hand. No one is filming us right now, Aglaia said. I know, he answered and squeezed her palm harder. What happened at the restaurant? Did I open some old wound? I'm divorced. 3 months ago, my husband left for his mistress. She didn't want to give him any details. Besides, she probably looked pathetic at that moment, and he asked that question just out of politeness. I'm sorry, I didn't think I'd make you cry. It's okay. You know, since my husband left me, I've been all alone. There's nothing going on in my life at all. And that moment at the restaurant felt so much like real happiness, and it hurts to realize it was just an illusion. She wanted to be honest with him, it was easier that way. Lying takes a lot of effort, and you have to keep too many things in mind. Aglaia almost always said what was on her mind, except when it was necessary to be politely silent. She considered excessive and inappropriate frankness to be stupidity and lack of good manners. Me too, I've been single for over a year. And I wish it were real. I know what you feel. You know, if you wanted to, we could start dating for real. I mean, there's nothing stopping us from making it real. He turned to her and looked into her eyes. She suddenly felt like she was being too intrusive and even pushy, and she felt awkward. No need. I was just saying that because you asked. I'm fine and ready to continue playing in your comedy. Besides, it will be good for me to distract myself from negative thoughts and brighten up my gray everyday life. But right now, I'd really like to have some time alone, if you don't mind. Aglaia walked away, leaving Alejandro somewhere behind. He was standing there staring after her. I'm such an idiot. She told me about the painful divorce and I suggested dating, he thought, turned, and walked back the other way. He remembered her eyes, her tears. He definitely liked her, but there was something more important right now. He needed to finish the job and not scare her off. It was more important than his feelings, more important than anything else in his life. The next step was their dinner with his parents. It was Aglaia's day off, so she had time to prepare thoroughly. As she picked out a dress, she thought about how she would have spent the day if it hadn't been for Alejandro and his fake wedding. She would probably have gone to the park, watched the couples with envy, bought herself a cake on the way home, and spent the next week hating herself for the extra kilos. Aglaya felt like she was on edge, one step away from depression. Alejandro picked her up around 8 in the evening. Aglaya was wearing a beautiful dress, high heels, a manicure, and makeup. Her hair was neatly styled, and this time she didn't forget about earrings. A ring decorated her finger as a symbol of fake love and loyalty to this foolish plan. It was uncomfortable to be around Alejandro. Aglaya knew it would come to an end soon and had already prepared herself for it. She felt like a silly, helpless kitten who ran after every passerby, hoping to get warmth and affection. And she scolded herself for really feeling something for Alejandro. She thought it was stupid and realized that those feelings had no future. He only suggested they pretend to be a happy couple for a while, but her subconscious was already painting pictures of a happy family. This is so stupid. Don't worry, my parents don't love me and they won't love you. It's just a formality. Are you ready? Alejandro asked, remembering how she had cried during the fake proposal. I'm ready. Why don't they love you? I think parents always love their children, it's just that different parents express their love in different ways. Sometimes children don't feel love because they're used to expressing it differently. Parents are programmed by nature to love their children, and children are programmed to love their parents. I'm not their biological son, Alejandro said, interrupting Aglaya's philosophical musings. Oh, she said. So I'm pretty sure they don't love me. But I don't expect anything from them, I have my own plans. They continued driving in silence. Soon the car stopped in front of a luxurious mansion. Aglaya whistled. You didn't tell me that your foster parents are tycoons. Well, they are not tycoons, just entrepreneurs. Come in and don't worry about anything. The interior was magnificent, cold marble was everywhere, and the walls were also made of white marble with black veins. It was clearly designed by a professional. There was a huge sparkling chandelier in the center of the hall. Aglaya thought that the marble floor would not be safe for a child, it was cold and slippery. Perhaps Alejandro was right, he had been a guest in this house since he was a child. There were many different cutlery on the large round table. Aglaya saw this and got worried, for her knowledge of dining etiquette was not good enough. Alejandro's mother was a slender and graceful woman with a short haircut and large sapphires in her ears. His father, on the other hand, was overweight but looked very serious and even arrogant. So how did you meet? Alejandro's mother, Carmelita Gutierrez, asked. Aglaya was confused, they had not discussed the details. Alejandro smiled at her. I told you, she saved me when I was in a car accident. From that day on, our relationship began. The head of the family, Esther Gutierrez, poured himself a glass of wine. Aglaya politely refused the drink. She wanted to keep her mind sober. You have to be focused and calm when you're lying. Excuse me for asking, but are you pregnant? Carmelita asked. Aglaya felt like someone had plunged a knife into her heart. She looked coldly at the woman and replied calmly. No. What if Alejandro really wanted to date her? Then what? How would she tell him she was infertile? At their last meeting, he'd almost offered her a real relationship. Aglaya couldn't believe his words were sincere, but what if he really liked her? Would the fact that she couldn't have children have stopped him? Of course, like Cassiano. Alejandro wouldn't say it directly either, but in the future, that would be the reason for their breakup. That's good. Don't rush into things like this, she said. Aglaya noticed that Alejandro's relationship with his parents was cold. If that was the maximum amount of parental warmth his mother could show in public, probably in real life, their relationship was even colder. Aglaya had managed to endure that evening with great difficulty. When she and Alejandro were alone, stepping outside the gates of the mansion, she exhaled. The air was pleasant, the heat finally subsided, and the evenings were chilly. It's hard to endure their company, I know. Alejandro said. He stood so close and was so nice, unlike his parents. Aglaya wanted to spend some more time with him. After all, they could just talk, it wouldn't oblige them to do anything. Let's take a walk, she suggested. I'd love to, he smiled. They walked down the street, talking about all sorts of things. He didn't dare touch her hand again, she already turned him down last time. Even though she confessed that she feels sad because it's not for real. So you're an adopted child? My parents and the Gutierrez family were companions. I have a different last name, Diaz. My mom and dad died in a car accident. I was a baby, I wasn't with them that day, I stayed at home with a nanny. It so happened that my father was raised in an orphanage, and my mom's parents died early, and there was no one to take care of me. Then Carmelita decided to adopt me. But she didn't really want to help the orphan. I own half of the company. Once they got custody, they began to manage my money themselves. They invested it several times, and the deals were successful. The fortune doubled, and so did my share. So it seems that everything worked out for the best. So marriage is necessary so that you can be the owner of your money again? She asked, voicing her hunch. No, it doesn't depend on marriage. I can get my money in a year when I turn 25. We've already discussed it. If I take all the money and invest it elsewhere, the company won't survive. I'd really like to do that because I'm not interested in this kind of business. I wish I could just take my money and distance myself from my foster parents. No, I'm grateful to them for raising me. But you saw what our relationship is like. They never made me feel like a family member, and they never even called me son. Esther can't have children, so I was their only child. And Carmelita never wanted to have children. She always said she didn't like children. She was not made to devote her life to children. Then why do you want to get married? She asked. Alejandro didn't answer anything, he was silent. It's very personal, he said after a long pause. Seriously? Isn't getting married to you personal? Come on, there should be no secrets from your future wife. She bumped him in the side with her fist. Well, okay, you'll find out anyway. I didn't tell you about it right away because I was afraid you'd say no. The damn bureaucracy is the problem. I just need to be legally married, you know? A few years ago, I had a girlfriend, and I loved her. Are you talking about that girl you had a bad breakup with? Aglaya recalled his words. No, it was the other girl before her, my first love. She was an orphan, my parents didn't like her. They didn't like her style, her simple clothes. When I invited her home, she came wearing a t-shirt with a dirty word on it. Carmelita was shocked. I was young and stupid then, I was 18, she was 22. She was older, my parents had done everything to break us up. They bribed her. Agata took the money and told me about it. We used it to get tattoos at a salon and continued dating. Wow. Aglaya laughed. She was amazing, kind, but rude. She could say anything she thought, and she was always sincere. I'd never met anyone like her before or after. She loved tattoos and took me to rock shows. And she looked cool. I was 18, I immediately fell in love. But my parents never let us be together. I won't bore you with the details, we broke up and they sent me to the capital to study. I only recently found out why my father paid so much money for my education at the best university. Initially, he had planned for me to go to a local university. Who cares what kind of diploma I'd get? My place of employment was known from the beginning anyway. But recently, I found out that Agata had given birth to my son and died in childbirth. Since she was an orphan, the baby ended up in an orphanage. Her friend tried to find me, but my parents intimidated her. They threatened to have her expelled from college and her parents fired. The Gutierrezes are a very powerful family, they can do anything. I made a scene at home, it's no joke. They deliberately hid the fact that I had a child and that Agata might have been alive if I had been there if she had given birth in a good hospital. I was so depressed when I found out. All this time I was sure she had just left this town and was living her life. My parents made sure I didn't find out anything, and my son grew up and is still living in an orphanage. He's 6 now and I want to raise him. I found him and see him twice a week, but they won't give him to me because I don't have my own house and because I'm not married. Can you imagine? This cute little boy has Agatha's eyes. All this time he lived in an orphanage, and only when he turned 6 did he find out he had a father. And every time he asks me why I don't take him home. Why don't your parents help you with this? Aren't they powerful? Can't money solve this problem? After all, years have passed, don't they understand? Aglaia asked. They walked around the empty park that was opposite the Gutierrez mansion. It was warm outside, but the cool breeze made Aglaia feel a little chilly. Alejandro noticed it, took off his jacket, and put it on her shoulders. The pleasant smell of his perfume made her smile sweetly. She felt the warmth from his clothes. She was pleased that such a handsome man cared for her. They won't help me. They're against it. They're the ones who've been trying to hide it from me all this time. I found out about it by accident. I didn't know Agata died, didn't know I had a son. Carmelita said I didn't need that child, and she didn't need him either. I was very young when it happened. She said that I wouldn't be able to devote myself to working for their company if I was busy adopting my own son. I don't know what's inside these people instead of a heart. Probably a money-counting machine. I offered money to the adoption authorities, but my foster parents were ahead of me. They told me frankly Gutierrez came to them and threatened them. So they won't help me, and I won't get my son until every single requirement is met. In this case, they can't go against the law. So, I bought myself an apartment recently. I invested everything I had in it. The Gutierrez weren't even gonna help me with it. They're doing everything they can to stop me. I guess they realized that in a year, I'll get my money and their company would be ruined. My father would probably try to keep me from bankrupting them. To be honest, I wasn't planning on leaving the company. After all, it's my biological parents' life's work. But the Gutierrez crossed the line. My sense of gratitude to them is slowly waning. They saved me from an orphanage, but sending my son to the orphanage is mean. So you need a marriage to adopt a child? And I'll be a parent, too? Why were you afraid to tell me that? A young girl might agree to a sham marriage, but you'd hardly agree if I came to you and said, let's get married and adopt my child. I'm sorry for that little lie, but I couldn't do otherwise. It's very important. More important than honesty. Aglaia sighed. You shouldn't think of me that way. If I'd known you had good intentions, I would have agreed more willingly. I thought you needed some visa or wanted to get an inheritance that way. I grew up in an orphanage myself, and I know how important it is to get a child out of there. Alejandro stopped and stared at Aglaia. You grew up in an orphanage? Yeah, I don't have parents. They died when I was a baby. You see, your parents' companions adopted you, and I was less fortunate. I won't complain. I had great caretakers and I still have friends. But I'm sure childhood in a family is much better. Any childhood, even the childhood you had. No matter what your foster parents' goals were, they saved you from that. And that's a good thing. And you can fix everything else. I'll do everything I can to make sure your son grows up with you, don't worry, she said. Alejandro couldn't resist. He felt a kindred spirit in her when she told him about her family. The wind was fluttering her short curls of hair, and it was so beautiful. She turned out to be even better than he initially thought, kind, honest, sincere, and not greedy. He thought he wouldn't stop until morning if he started listing her virtues. He leaned over and kissed her. Aglaia was surprised by this. She had just been talking about her parents and some important things, and suddenly he kissed her. But she couldn't say it was unpleasant. So she kissed him back. She really liked him, and honestly, she missed it so much kissing on the street. Alejandro pulled away from her and looked into her eyes. He had to explain his outburst somehow. He didn't understand if she was mad at him. I didn't realize we had so much in common. Do you always express your feelings that way, even at work? Aglaia asked jokingly. Alejandro laughed. She was not angry, it's good. And she didn't hit him and even kissed him back, a good sign. They kept walking and talking about everything. They walked almost until midnight until their feet got tired, and then Alejandro drove her home. He walked Aglaya to her front door but didn't dare to kiss her. Aglaya was saddened by this fact. She wanted him to do it again. It was funny, she had feelings for the man who would soon be her husband. Her fake husband. The marriage ceremony was scheduled for the end of the week. Everyone at the hospital congratulated Aglaya and asked about her fiancé. She briefly told her colleagues about Alejandro. After all, everyone remembered how they had met. But she was concerned about something else. What would happen after the divorce? They would all point their fingers at her and whisper behind her back. Aglaya doesn't know how to get along with men, the second divorce in 6 months. Awkward, but at least now she knew that the goal was really important. It was important to Alejandro that everyone believed them, and she would help him. After all, if his parents are trying to stop Alejandro, and moreover, deprive an innocent child of a normal childhood, it's really important that their marriage does not seem fake to anyone. Aglaya posted some photos from the restaurant on her social media profile and immediately got tons of likes and comments. Cassiano was the most frequent visitor to her page. Surprisingly, after he left, she had already forgotten what his profile on social media looked like. He liked her photos, and right after that, he posted a picture of himself with his girlfriend. His lady was nice and skinny. Her rounded belly was already very noticeable. Aglaya only sighed sadly about it. Before the wedding, Alejandro invited her to the cinema. She didn't understand whether it was a part of a plan or he really wanted to spend time with her. They had fun watching a good comedy. When the movie was over, they walked outside. "Did you like the movie?" she asked. "Yes, it's a funny comedy, but I wouldn't watch it again. I don't understand why everyone is only talking about this movie." "I totally agree. There were more rumors than the movie itself, a primitive story. But it was worth to watch it once, there were some good moments." Suddenly, Cassiano and his pregnant girlfriend showed up out of nowhere. "Aglaya, hi. How was the movie? Have you already watched it?" he asked as if they were longtime friends. "Yes, it's a great movie," she replied indifferently, taking Alejandro's hand. He quickly realized what was going on. "Hi, I'm Alejandro, Aglaya's fiancé," he said, extending his hand to Cassiano. "And I'm Cassiano, her ex-husband," he said. "Nice to meet you," Alejandro smiled. Cassiano's girlfriend was visibly nervous and didn't even look at Aglaya. "How long have you two been together?" "I mean, all this time I was tormented by conscience that I left for another woman, and it turns out that you cheated on me, too," Cassiano said. He was clearly hurt by the fact that Aglaya had a boyfriend. Of course, he was jealous. They had been together for so long. It couldn't just end and go away without a trace. Alejandro looked at Aglaya and smiled. She sighed heavily. "It's none of your business anymore, Cassiano. Let's go, Cassiano. As you can see, she's been lying to you all this time." "You should have left her a long time ago," his pregnant girlfriend said. "Seriously? You ruined a family, got pregnant by her husband, and forced him to leave his wife," Alejandro said, looking into the eyes of the rude girl. "What else could he do if his wife was infertile?" she said, and dragged Cassiano away with her. Alejandro raised his eyebrows. "Didn't you know?" "Good luck, man," Cassiano said, turning around. The unpleasant encounter was over. Aglaya lowered her head. Alejandro looked at her and lifted her by the chin. "Is it true?" "Now you know," she said sadly. "I'm not even a woman, I can't have children." Alejandro hugged her and kissed her on the lips. He thought it would help her. Aglaya was very upset, but the kiss made her feel alive. It breathed feelings into her, making the tears disappear. They kissed for so long that they didn't notice Cassiano was there again. "You know, as a husband who has been cheated on, I can't just watch this," he said, and tried to hit Alejandro. He deftly dodged Cassiano's hand and quickly hit back. Cassiano remained lying on the ground, and his girlfriend, seeing that the boys were fighting, not because of her, just turned around and walked away. I always knew you were like that, Cassiano said, getting up from the ground. Only people like you are capable of that. Don't compare Aglaia to yourself. Alejandro said menacingly, took Aglaia's hand, and walked away. Suddenly she stopped, looked at Alejandro, and asked, "What was that?" "You're kissing me, hitting my ex, standing up for me. What is that supposed to mean?" "Explain, because I don't think that was part of our plan. We agreed to pretend to be a couple. But you're acting like I'm really your fiancé." Aglaia looked at him pleadingly. She was completely confused. This petite, short-haired brunette was trying her best not to fall in love with him because he had said right away that he would divorce her in 3 months. But now he acted like everything was real. And she didn't want to go through another painful breakup. I think that's what anyone would do. He was the one who started the fight. My father took me to Taekwondo when I was a kid. My foster father. Aglaia shook her head. You know I can't have children. I was afraid to tell you about it for some reason, but now you know the whole truth about me. I want to go home. Aglaia turned around and walked away. But a moment later Alejandro stopped her. He looked down at her. Today medicine is doing wonders and your infertility is not a final verdict. And even if it were, it wouldn't be a problem for me. I would be happy to adopt 2 girls and raise them with you. Aglaia didn't understand what he was trying to say. Was it all for real? Why are they even talking about this if their relationship is a lie? Cassiano also said it wasn't a problem, but he left me for his pregnant mistress. And before that, he cheated on me with her for over 2 years, and I knew that, but I didn't dare to leave. I don't want to live like this anymore. I'm better off alone. And when it's over, I'll get another divorce mark on my passport, and then I can finally just live my life without imposing myself and my problems on anyone. What on earth are you talking about? Don't you see that I really like you? I don't care about anything. I fell in love with you the very first time I met you. I just didn't think it could be mutual. The nurses told me you were going through a divorce. So I knew it. And the more I get to know you, the more I realize you're my soulmate. And that's not just for show, I mean it. Alejandro waited for her reaction, but Aglaia was silent. I'm going to die of nervousness. Say something. He couldn't stand it. Aglaia smiled, walked up to him, and kissed him on the cheek. You're just feeling sorry for me, like Cassiano. Everybody wants a family, everybody wants kids. And I do, but I can't give you what you need. And I'm not gonna burden someone else. Let's just leave it as it is. At least now I know for sure we're getting divorced. I don't want to give myself false hope and go through this again. Please try to understand, for me, it's like getting a knife wound where there was another knife wound. It hurts twice as much. She looked into his eyes with so much pain that it took his breath away. At that moment, she told him everything and shared her true feelings. Aglaia simply walked away, and Alejandro didn't dare catch up with her. He was sure she wouldn't let him kiss her again, would push him away. She didn't accept his confession, didn't believe him. And it was understandable. Their wedding took place in the presence of Alejandro's parents and Aglaia's friend. The ceremony was very modest, and then they had dinner in a small cafe. Aglaia acted like the happiest bride. It wasn't easy for her, but she realized there was no turning back. During the ceremony, she wanted to burst into tears again. After all brides cry. She was wearing a simple white dress, and Alejandro was wearing his business suit. Only the veil indicated that this was a wedding and not just a typical family dinner. However, the photographer took 1,000 photos. Aglaia posted a few of them on the internet to finish Cassiano. He should know that she's not just a miserable, lonely woman. That thought made her feel a little better. When they got married, Aglaia panicked. Just yesterday she was a fiancée, and soon she would be divorced again. Everything seemed to be spinning in some infernal circle in her life. Her head began to spin, but Alejandro held her hand tightly. This day he could kiss her as much as he wanted in public, and Aglaya would kiss him back. She enjoyed his kisses, his warm hands. After all, that was their plan. She really had feelings for Alejandro, and it was obvious to everyone. However, his parents only grudgingly pressed their lips, trying to keep silent. It was unclear if they believed their son and his wife, or if they understood that it was just a sham marriage. In any case, Aglaya could see that they were not happy for their adopted son. Over dinner at the restaurant, Alejandro's mom asked the girl who her parents were. "My mom worked at the school and my dad was an auto mechanic," she said. "Are they retired now?" "No, they died when I was a few months old. I grew up in an orphanage." Alejandro's mom raised her eyebrows and continued eating her salad. No sympathy, no shock. "You know, it's no surprise, Alejandro already dated an orphanage girl before you. He likes orphans a lot. Probably because he grew up without parents himself." "Did you grow up in a family?" she asked her mother-in-law. "Of course," she said as if it were her own choice and achievement. "Then you were luckier than me or Alejandro." The teasing was successful. Carmelita looked at her daughter-in-law reproachfully, and the dialogue was finished. When the dinner was over, Alejandro and Aglaya got into the car and drove to the hotel where he had rented them a magnificent honeymoon suite. Alejandro looked at her with admiration. He whispered in her ears that he loved her, that she was the most beautiful woman in the world. Aglaya smiled with just her eyes, making it clear that she didn't believe a single word he said. When they were in the room, she sat on a huge bed covered with rose petals. There was an ice bucket on the table with a bottle of champagne in it. "I hope you're not going to say now that we have to confirm our marriage and sleep together?" she asked tiredly. "No. I just want to say that I didn't lie once today. It was the pure truth when I told you I would be with you forever in joy and sorrow, and when I told you about my feelings." Aglaya shook her head. "I want to leave. My parents could have hired someone to prove our marriage was a sham. They asked me directly about it. I don't want to give them a reason to stop me." Aglaya got up and paced around the room. "Then, let me change my clothes, camouflage myself, and leave through the back door." The sun was shining outside the window. It was daytime. She didn't want to spend this day enjoying a fake relationship with a 3-month shelf life. "Can't you hear me? I'm telling you that I really love you." Aglaya refused to believe it, didn't let herself think about it, but she couldn't stop herself from feeling it. Alejandro came to her, embraced her, and pressed her against him. "You're my wife now and I don't want a divorce. Of course, I will not force you. But, at least give me a chance, since we are married." He kissed her and she could not help but return the kiss. Aglaya let go of her fears and worries and allowed herself to just give in to the moment. They had spent almost 24 hours together. She decided to give herself at least a few hours of happiness and joy. She decided that she needed to live in the moment since she wasn't going to have a long and happy life. After the wedding, Aglaya and Alejandro went to the adoption authorities and filed the necessary documents for adoption. Aglaya started to collect them a little earlier. Alejandro explained what to do. This procedure wasn't simple. Probably even astronauts undergo more simple examinations than people who want to adopt a child. The adoption specialist said that they have to wait, but most likely everything will be fine now. Alejandro and Aglaya walked out of the building. It was drizzling outside, and Aglaya was chilly, but she didn't want to get back in the car with Alejandro. After a night together, she just headed home and didn't pick up the phone for 2 days. She decided not to let herself expect anything. She realized they had no future anyway. He was a successful entrepreneur raised in a wealthy family, and she was just an infertile nurse grown up in an orphanage. Plus he, like Cassiano, had the love of his life left behind. Even though Agata died, Aglaya could hardly get what she wanted. She had given herself 100 reasons to give up hope, but the foolish hope didn't want to give up. And now she was standing right next to him, and he was looking into her eyes as if he really loved her. "You know, This is the first time I've ever felt like the girl who spent the night with someone and didn't get a call back, he said. Aglaia laughed. Sorry, I just don't want to give myself false hopes. You are a silly and insanely beautiful creature, Aglaia. Okay, I won't insist. Can we at least watch a movie at my place tonight? I got a new horror movie, but I'm afraid to watch it alone. Horror movie? Okay. She didn't tell him that she likes horror movies too, but she stopped watching them because now she lives alone in the apartment. She just doesn't have anyone to hold her hand when something scary happens on screen. They spent another lovely night together. No intimacy, just pizza, a movie, and sleep. They went to bed together because it was scary to sleep alone after the horror movie. Falling asleep on his shoulder, she thought she could get used to it. And he thought he wouldn't divorce her, even if she wanted to. These meetings became a habit for them. Now, already after the wedding, they were going through that period that other couples had at the beginning of their relationship. Aglaia realized that she was getting used to him more and more, that she was waiting for his call and dreading the day when he would say it was over. A month and a half passed. Aglaia and Alejandro came to the orphanage and walked out with a 6-year-old boy. He was so adorable, so cute, he talked a lot, he had a lot of emotion. And he clung to Aglaia and wouldn't let go. He talked only to her, started calling her mom right away, and told her how he waited for her and how he missed her. Aglaia burst out in tears several times. She had not expected such a twist. Alejandro prepared a room for the boy, and Aglaia bathed him at home. Alejandro could hear them laughing, how easy it was for Aglaia to communicate with him. She became his official parent. The adoption was successful. Late at night, when little Roberto fell asleep, she and Alejandro were alone. I didn't expect him to be so attached to me right away. I can say the same about myself. What? Aglaia didn't understand. I didn't expect to be attached to you right away either. Now that the plan is completed, it's official, I'm not going to divorce you. I want to be with you. And if I don't?
After a long day, Diane sat down to count her earnings. Just the day before, she was fortunate enough that her neighbor, Mrs. Tammy Lasher, had asked her to help with moving the stuff around her house. Even though the work had left her feeling exhausted, Diane found solace in the fact that she had made some extra money. Ever since Diane had moved into the room in an old house, she had known Mrs. Lasher, a businesslike woman who held a welcoming demeanor. Mrs. Lasher was a prominent figure in the local community, recognized and respected by nearly everyone. As Diane got to know her better over time, she discovered that beneath Mrs. Lasher's professional exterior lay a genuinely kind and caring individual. Her curiosity was insatiable. She had an intrinsic interest in everyone's lives, which was balanced by her generous and empathetic nature. While they were working together, Tammy turned to Diane and said, "You've been my next-door neighbor for about a year now, haven't you, Diane?" "Yes, you have quite an impressive memory, Mrs. Lasher," Diane responded. Tammy's eyes sparkled with amusement as she said, "Well, as a community representative, I try to keep track of what's happening in our neighborhood." She paused, a smile playing on her lips. "Even though you've been here for quite some time, I've only seen you a few times." Diane chuckled and replied, "That's not surprising, really. My days are filled with studying and my evenings with work. It seems like I use my place only for sleeping. Luckily, I got this room pretty cheap. Living closer to my job in the city center would be too expensive." Tammy, looking intrigued, asked, "Do your parents live in a different city?" "I'm an orphan, actually," Diane responded. Taken aback, Tammy dropped the wallpaper roll she was holding. "Oh, I'm so sorry, Diane." "No need to apologize. I've adjusted to it," Diane replied, though a hint of sadness tinged her words. Tammy sighed sympathetically. "It must be tough to feel so alone." Diane responded, "Like I said, I've grown accustomed to it. I believe my father is out there somewhere, but he abandoned me before I was even born. My mother passed away when I was very young. I don't have many memories of her, just a few old photographs." Wanting to offer some comfort, Tammy said in a sincere, caring tone, "Diane, if you ever need anything, don't hesitate to ask. It could be anything from problems with your utilities to disputes with other neighbors. I may be just a regular person, but I promise to help as best as I can. I have a few connections that could be useful. Diane offered a grateful smile and returned to her work. Once they finished moving the furniture in the living room, Mrs. Lasher commended Diane on her meticulous work. To Diane's surprise, she didn't just hand her the agreed-upon payment, but also gave her some groceries. "Take these, dear. My household can't possibly finish all of this. Despite being miles away, my son insists on ordering a lot of food for us. He's always making sure we're well fed." Feeling a wave of gratitude, Diane thanked Mrs. Lasher and got back to her own place. However, once alone, she was unable to hold back her tears. Life had been an uphill battle ever since her mother's death. The cold, impersonal environment of the orphanage had been her reality, a place devoid of warmth and love. Diane had to fight for everything she had, always maintaining an aura of discipline and composure. Her innate sense of justice, a trait that had often got her in trouble as a child, also fueled her ambition to study law. She had fought hard to gain admission into law school after high school and had been working tirelessly ever since to finance her education. That day, Mrs. Lasher's simple act of kindness had moved her deeply. It contradicted her belief that no one cared about others. On her day off, Diane found herself browsing through baby items in the store window. She knew she couldn't afford many things, but she still had 4 months to prepare. She was determined to manage it all, even though the cost of necessities like a crib and a stroller was daunting. She thought of seeking out used items online, a more affordable alternative. As for her studies, she decided to take an academic leave to dedicate herself entirely to caring for her upcoming baby. She stepped inside the store and made a modest purchase, some cozy blankets and baby onesies. As she returned home and was admiring her purchases, the doorbell rang. It was Mrs. Lasher. "Diane, dear, I noticed you coming home. I baked an apple pie today and thought you might enjoy a slice," she said. "Oh, Mrs. Lasher, you really shouldn't have. But why don't we enjoy some tea together?" Diane suggested. Tammy agreed. "Sure, why not? It's always more enjoyable together. My son Samuel is at work again." While Diane prepared the tea, Mrs. Lasher walked around the room, her attention drawn to the baby items spread out on the couch. "Diane, who are these for?" she asked, pointing at the new baby clothes. Feeling a blush creep up her cheeks, Diane quietly answered, "They're for my baby. I'm expecting in about 5 months." Mrs. Lasher looked at her for a moment, then asked, "And the father? I presume he's no longer in the picture?" Diane sighed. It was the first time anyone had been so direct about her ex-boyfriend, Caden. They sat down with their tea, and Mrs. Lasher said, "Listen, you don't have to discuss it if you don't want to, but if you ever need a shoulder to lean on or someone to listen, I'm here for you." Diane sighed again. She stirred her tea for a few moments, grappling with the emotions welling up inside her. Talking about it wasn't going to be easy. Diane's story began in the bustling cafe where she worked. It was a typical sunny day, with Diane flitting between tables, taking orders in her crisp uniform. The cafe, known as the Cheesecake, was a popular spot, especially on Friday evenings, brimming with lively conversations and laughter. A group of young men and women were seated at a far-off table, and Diane made her way towards them to take their order. "Why did it take you so long? We've been waiting forever," one of the girls complained, despite having just arrived a couple minutes ago. Maintaining her professional composure, Diane flashed a polite smile and apologized for the slight delay, a tactic she often used to diffuse impatient customers. However, the girl seemed adamant about making a fuss over minor details. "All right, Pia, settle down. We just got here. Don't be harsh," interjected a dark-haired guy from the group, coming to Diane's defense. He locked his gray eyes with Diane's, offering her a charming smile. Caught off guard, Diane managed to take their orders and quickly return to her duties. Yet throughout the rest of their stay, she couldn't shake off the feeling of the young man's eyes following her. As they were about to leave, the guy approached her. He introduced himself as Caden and asked for her phone number. Diane's polite refusal seemed to take him by surprise, his confident demeanor replaced by confusion, though he still looked interested. From then on, Caden became a regular at the Cheesecake Cafe. He would often bring flowers and small gifts for Diane, stop by for coffee, and patiently wait for her shift to end, all in a bid to win her over. Diane, a quiet and reserved girl, was known for her dependability and level-headedness. She was respected at the Cheesecake, her superiors appreciating her diligence and dedication to both her work and her studies. Diane was not impulsive. Rather, she preferred to think through decisions carefully. She had always thought herself capable of handling any life situation, yet Caden's persistent attention left her unprepared, and she soon found herself falling for his charm. Caden, a member of the city's privileged youth, soon became the center of Diane's world. They had only known each other for 6 months, but his conversations about their shared future felt earnest and genuine. He talked about their life after marriage, and even mentioned introducing her to his family. Diane found herself believing in his words wholeheartedly, considering herself the luckiest woman in the world. One day, she was particularly eager to meet Caden. She had been feeling under the weather for a few days, plagued by persistent nausea and fatigue. That morning, she had taken a pregnancy test, discovering that she was expecting. Initially, a wave of panic and fear washed over Diane, quickly followed by a burst of joy. The realization that she was carrying Caden's baby filled her with an undeniable euphoria. She hastily headed to see Caden at his workplace, a bright smile dancing on her face despite the turmoil of emotions within her. Excitement mixed with a tinge of worry. Was it all happening too fast? These worries, however, were overshadowed by the thought that Caden's promises were becoming a reality. They would always be together, they would raise a child, and they would be the happiest family. Recently, Caden had joined his father's business, being groomed to take over the family empire someday. As the only child of affluent parents, he was given his own office right from the start of his career, a fact he often shared with pride. Diane walked into the office building, surprised to find his secretary missing from her desk. However, her heart sank as she found Caden with his secretary, the woman perched on his desk, both of them laughing and sharing an intimate moment. As she barged in, they quickly pulled away from each other, looking surprised and guilty. "Diane, what are you doing here?" Caden stammered, looking somewhat panicked. He quickly composed himself, clearing his throat, and introduced his secretary Gina as his childhood friend. Taken aback, Diane pushed her feelings of unease aside. She had an important news to share, and she wouldn't let anything ruin the moment. "Caden, I have something to tell you." Caden, standing awkwardly beside Gina, said, "Diane, it can wait." Trying not to feel slighted, Diane decided that this was not the time to hold grudges. She waited for Caden to dismiss Gina, and once they were alone, she prepared herself to share the news. "So, what's the news?" Caden asked, leaning against his desk. Diane beamed at him. "Caden, you might want to sit down for this." Caden, standing tall and casual, responded. Diane just spit it out. "All right. Remember I warned you. We're going to have a baby, Caden." Surprise registered on Caden's face. He gawked at her before managing to say, "What? We? You must be mistaken. I didn't ask for this." Still smiling but feeling a pit in her stomach, Diane responded, "Caden, what are you saying? It's our baby. Yours and mine." He retorted, "Why should I be happy? I didn't plan on becoming a father anytime soon." "But Caden, you promised we'd be together always," Diane managed to say. "Us? Together? Did you think getting pregnant would force me to stay? If you thought you could trap me with a baby, you were sorely mistaken." His harsh words hit Diane like a punch. She found herself gasping for air. "Caden?" She barely managed to utter his name. Ignoring her, he headed towards the door, opening it with a loud bang. Before leaving, he turned to say, "Diane, go home. I'll call you later. I've got a meeting now. You know your way out." With tear-filled eyes, Diane watched as the door slammed shut, leaving her alone with the harsh reality. That very evening, Caden did get in touch. However, instead of offering reassurances or explanations, he demanded that Diane terminate the pregnancy. He bombarded her with similar messages over the next few days. Ultimately, Caden, barely recognizable from the man Diane thought she knew, met her one more time, this time handing her money. He said it was for taking care of the baby issue and told her to never bother him again. "Mrs. Lasher, please don't think less of me," Diane implored, her eyes pleading with the older woman. Caden's world was different from mine. It was radiant, filled with warmth and light, devoid of pain or worries, just endless celebration. He was so caring and gentle with me, promising that our life together would be nothing but joys and happiness. And I believed it all. I thought I was special, different from the others. But I was just naive and ended up getting hurt. Tammy, her eyes sympathetic, questioned, "Did you love him, Diane?" "Yes, I did, and it felt like Caden loved me too," Diane responded, her voice barely above a whisper. "But how could he love you if he treated you this way?" Tammy shook her head, her brows furrowed in confusion. Closing her eyes, Diane nodded in agreement. "I don't know, Mrs. Lasher. I truly don't know why he acted like that. Or perhaps I just don't want to admit the truth, even though deep down, I know." Tammy, after a pause, asked, "Diane, did you ever consider—" "Well, you know." Diane, looking shocked, quickly interjected, "No, absolutely not. This baby is innocent. Why would I even think of that?" "That's wonderful, Diane. You're a smart girl. Don't worry. Things will get better, I promise. You know, not everyone has the kind of strength you possess. You even have your own place to live. Let me ask around the neighborhood. Maybe someone has a baby stroller or crib they don't need anymore. Children grow up so fast, and people here respect my opinion," Tammy assured, a smile forming on her face. "I, too, felt lonely once, but I was lucky to find Ben. He was my beacon in the darkness, and we've been together for 45 years, always supporting each other. If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to ask." Touched by Tammy's kindness, Diane expressed her gratitude. "Thank you so much, Mrs. Lasher. I will do my best to handle everything on my own, but knowing that I have your support certainly makes life a bit easier." Diane still had a few things to sort out, but for now, she could take a break. The most vital thing was that she had people in her life she could truly depend on. This was incredibly valuable, and everything else would sort itself out in due course. Diane now knew the path she needed to take to rebuild her life, and she was certain she would thank Mr. and Mrs. Lasher someday for their kind-heartedness. Tammy set to work preparing the house for Diane and the baby's homecoming. They were due to leave the maternity hospital the next day. Tammy started by cleaning the kitchen and bathroom, and then she sorted the groceries in the fridge. Next, she moved to Diane's bedroom and began dusting the shelves. As she brushed against the leather-bound book, it fell to the floor. It was a notebook, and when it fell open, Tammy saw a page full of neat handwriting. "Oops," Tammy said as she bent to pick it up. She noticed her own name written in the notebook. Although she felt a twinge of guilt, curiosity got the better of her, and she read the entry. Tears filled her eyes as she read Diane's heartfelt words. The diary entry revealed Diane's deep appreciation and love for the Lashers, and she wrote about praying for their well-being. When Diane and the baby arrived home in Mr. Lasher's car, he commented on the baby's name. "Levi, huh? That's a good, strong name. May he grow up to be healthy and bring joy to his mama," he said, helping Diane with the baby and their bags. "I think so too, Mr. Lasher," Diane replied, smiling at him. As Diane stepped through the front door, she was taken aback by the sight of her home. Her neighbors had outdone themselves. The house was spotless and beautifully decorated with blue balloons and white flowers. Soft music filled the air, and the mouth-watering scent of home-cooked food wafted from the kitchen. Diane was immediately swept up in Mrs. Lasher's warm embrace. Tammy planted a loud kiss on Diane's cheek and gently took the baby from her arms. The expression on Tammy's face was a mix of excitement, happiness, and perhaps a touch of nervousness. With her voice shaking slightly with excitement, she said, "Well, hello, dear." Diane returned her smile, looking a bit perplexed, and followed the couple into the room. As they sat down to talk, Ben addressed Diane in a serious tone. "Diane, we need to discuss something important with you." "Is something wrong?" Diane asked, a worried look crossing her face. Tammy quickly dismissed her husband's grave tone. "Ben, you've scared her now. Why so serious?" Then she turned to Diane, already smiling, and said, "Ben simply wanted to say that we would like to invite you to stay with us for a while. We want to be close to help you with whatever you need and offer advice when necessary." Diane stared at the couple in surprise. "Stay with you? Oh my, I don't want to be a burden." "Absolutely not," Tammy reassured her. "Our house is plenty big, and our son is away working overseas, so his room is free. We won't take no for an answer. When you feel ready and capable of taking care of yourself and Levi, you can find somewhere else if you wish." Caught up in the moment, Diane rushed forward and enveloped the couple in a tight hug. Mr. Lasher chuckled awkwardly and gently patted her back, while Mrs. Lasher held her close for a long moment. As time passed, life continued on its natural course. The baby, Levi, grew up strong and healthy, and Diane managed to find work. She returned to university and after a successful final year, graduated with distinction. Although Diane had long since moved away from the Lashers, they continued to support her as they always had. Tammy helped care for Levi until Diane found a suitable nanny. In time, Diane moved to a large city where she pursued her ambitions diligently. Her journey took her from a young, lost waitress in a cafe to a resilient, determined, and successful businesswoman. Over 8 years, Diane built her own business, providing a comfortable life for herself and Levi, complete with a lovely apartment in the city center and a car. Diane ensured Levi had a bright future, enrolling him in a highly regarded school where he soon became a top student. His life was rich and fulfilling, filled with exciting activities, sports achievements, and great times with good friends. The Lashers stayed in the same small town, their happiness complete when their son returned from abroad to run his business locally. Although he didn't live with them, he visited them often. "Darling, come take a look at this," Tammy called her husband one day, peering out the window at the street. Parked right in front of their house was a brand new black pickup truck. "This truck's been here since Saturday. I'm a bit nervous. Did you pick a fight with someone at the bar again?" "Don't be ridiculous. Of course not," her husband replied, also looking at the enormous vehicle in their driveway. "You never know who might have a bone to pick with two old folks like us." He laughed heartily at his wife's comment before returning to his comfortable chair in front of the TV. The next day, the truck remained parked in front of their house, leaving the couple uneasy. Ben wondered if it had been abandoned or perhaps stolen. In the evening, having exhausted all speculation about the mysterious truck, the doorbell rang. Tammy opened the door and gasped in surprise and delight. Standing before her was a radiant young woman, a bouquet of roses in her hands. "Surprise!" Diane announced with a radiant smile, wrapping Tammy in a warm embrace. "Oh, our dear Diane!" exclaimed the pleasantly surprised elderly woman. After a moment, she released Diane and ushered her into the house. "Honey, look who's come to see us!" "Where have you been all this time, Diane?" Ben chided her later at the dinner table as he piled a heap of delicious dishes onto her plate. "Oh, lay off her, old man. Diane's a busy woman," Tammy said, jumping to Diane's defense. Ben grumbled but reached across the table to squeeze Diane's hand. "We've missed you dearly," he said, a smile softening his stern demeanor. Diane had been meaning to visit the elderly couple for some time, but her busy schedule had always seemed to get in the way. This time, she was determined to clear her calendar, postponing work and rescheduling meetings just to spend time with her cherished friends. With her son Levi on a 3-day trip with his friend's family, she had come alone. As she sat with them, catching up and watching the couple's loving banter, Diane felt a sense of immense joy. Their interaction brought back memories of the early days after Levi's birth, when a usually gruff Ben Lasher would coo over the baby, refusing to let him out of his arms. Despite Tammy's protest that he was spoiling the baby, Ben personally selected and purchased all the baby necessities, driving them over in his old car. "By the way, Mr. Lasher, what do you think of the truck?" Diane asked him casually. "What truck?" Ben responded, confused. "You didn't receive my letter?" Diane asked, surprised. The elderly couple exchanged baffled glances. "I apologize. I completely forgot to ensure you received the card and letter. That was thoughtless of me," Diane said, chiding herself. "Anyway, this is something I've been dreaming of doing for some time. It's not a grand gesture, but please accept it as a token of my gratitude." The new truck, which had been parked outside their house, was in fact a gift from Diane. She recalled a conversation from years ago when she was pregnant and juggling her job and caring for her newborn son. During a rare, unguarded moment, Mr. Lasher had voiced a quiet wish for a new vehicle to replace his beat-up old Honda, fantasizing about taking Tammy on drives in a big truck. Diane had never forgotten this, and now she had the means to make his dream come true. Mr. Lasher expressed his surprise while Tammy simply stared at Diane, her eyes wide. The generous gift had left them utterly dumbfounded. They protested, insisting they couldn't possibly accept it, but Diane stood her ground. Finally, Mr. Lasher relented, accepting the keys with a grateful nod. "We spent the entire day wondering who could have left a truck right in front of our house. Oh, Diane, you truly surprised us. We can't thank you enough." The couple beamed at each other, acknowledging that they were overwhelmed not so much by the gift itself, but by the heartfelt sentiment behind it. Absolutely, the Lashers were financially capable of purchasing a new car by themselves. Their son Samuel frequently suggested that they let go of their trusty old Honda so that he could present them with a more contemporary model. Yet the couple consistently declined his offer, favoring their old, reliable vehicle. Mr. Lasher had occasionally grumbled about the car's antiquated features and shortcomings to Diane. However, this was more out of a desire to put Diane at ease than an actual need for an upgrade. He understood the importance of keeping up appearances and often played along with complaints about their old car to match Diane's social status and make her feel comfortable. With a giddy sense of excitement, Ben drove off to take a spin around the neighborhood. Meanwhile, the women made themselves comfortable on the porch, engaging in pleasant conversation. "How have you been, dear? Your son must be quite the young man by now," Tammy asked, sipping her tea. "Everything's well, Mrs. Lasher," Diane responded, her voice somewhat robotic. "Levi, yes, he's matured a lot. He's responsible, intelligent. My rock." "And your love life?" Tammy probed. Diane looked down, her cheeks reddening slightly, prompting Tammy to arch an eyebrow in anticipation. "Well, there's someone new. He's a business partner of mine. I think he's interested in me. He's invited me to dinner several times under the pretense of discussing business, but these dinners have felt more like dates." "And?" Tammy pressed. "I don't know. I'm conflicted. He's attractive and he's incredibly gentle, respectful, caring, and witty. Our conversations are always enjoyable, but I don't want to rush things, especially considering Levi. Since when is having a child a problem? Don't miss out on happiness because of outdated norms," Tammy said sternly. After a moment's pause, Tammy sighed, adding, "Ever since my son returned, I've imagined introducing you two. You would have made a lovely pair, but it seems life has other plans." At this, Diane chuckled, leaning her head on Tammy's shoulder, comforted by her words and the warm affection she'd always shown her. When Mr. Lasher returned from his joyride, his face was aglow with happiness. He couldn't stop raving about the feeling of the truck Diane had gifted. Diane then surprised the couple once more, kindly offering them to move to her house in the city. The Lashers warmly thanked her but declined her generous offer. "Our son wanted us to move with him too, but why would we need the hustle and bustle of that big city? We love it here in our snug home where we've lived our whole life," they explained. The following morning, they bid Diane goodbye, standing outside their cozy home. "Promise you'll visit more often, and bring Levi with you next time," Tammy instructed, a stern look on her face replaced with a soft smile as Diane nodded, getting into her car. Back in the city, Diane delved into her work during the day and devoted her evenings to her son. However, she couldn't help but notice the increased attention from Ryan, her business partner. He'd surprise her with rare theater and opera tickets or send her favorite flowers. His knowledge of their interests amazed her, but she still hadn't revealed the most significant part of her life to him, causing her some worry. One day, she decided to address it head-on. She invited Ryan over for a coffee. "Ryan, there's something important I need to tell you," she said, looking at the smiling man sitting across from her. Ryan's smile vanished as he responded, "Yes, Diane, I'm listening." Gathering her courage, Diane began to speak. "Ryan, before things get any deeper, I want to let you know that Ryan interrupted her. "You don't really like me." Diane felt a rush of warmth spread across her cheeks and she quickly set things straight. No, that's not it at all. I actually like you a lot." The words tumbled out before she could stop them, leaving her surprised at her own boldness. A moment of silence ensued as she processed what she had just confessed. She felt an uncomfortable pang of anxiety, unsure of how she would react. Trying to break the tension, she nervously laughed and tried to lighten the mood. "Well, that came out faster than I thought it would." Ryan exhaled, visibly relieved. "So what's the matter then?" "I have a son. He's 8 years old. You're a successful, handsome young man with a bright future ahead. You could be with anyone you choose, someone perhaps more suitable. Why would you choose a single mother when you could find someone younger, someone without baggage?" "Is that all you want me to be aware of before we proceed?" Ryan asked, his gaze fixed on Diane. "I just want to make sure my son isn't seen as a burden. Diane replied, her voice laden with concern. "He means the world to me." Ryan considered her for a moment before exhaling deeply. "Do you remember the first time we met at the business center? I was so taken by you, so captivated by your presence, that I barely heard a word you were saying about our potential partnership. My team had to fill me in later. That night, I wanted to learn everything about you, and it was the same night I discovered about Levi." Diane stared at him, her expression a blend of astonishment and disbelief. "But what I couldn't have imagined back then was how much I'd grow to love your son," Ryan continued. "At first, I was just curious about the two of you, so I arranged to meet Levi. Then I found myself eagerly attending his sports games and hanging out with him and his friends. Eventually, I confessed to him that I had feelings for his mother, and I asked if I could court you. He gave me his blessing." Diane's mouth fell open in shock. "What?" "I apologize," Ryan hurriedly added. "I should have discussed it with you first. I hope you're not angry." Diane was stunned. In retrospect, she realized there had been signs: the sudden appearance of toys she wouldn't normally buy, Levi's unexplained outgoings to play with the local boys, even when they hardly knew any kids in the neighborhood. But she never suspected that Ryan was behind it all. At first, she felt a flash of anger, more directed at Levi for his little secret, but as she locked eyes with Ryan, seeing his sincere and hopeful look, her anger melted away to be replaced by a tender smile. She was looking at someone who genuinely cared for her and her son, something she hadn't experienced in a very long time. While there were other men who'd shown interest in her over the years, none had managed to win the trust of both her and Levi. And so, after 9 years of putting up walls, Diane let herself embrace the possibility of love, not just for her, but for her son as well. She opened her heart to a new relationship, one that included both her and Levi. Diane's life began to burst with vibrant hues. Ryan's care and affection filled each day with a newfound joy. And it wasn't just Diane who loved him. Her son Levi adored them too, seeing in Ryan a best friend and a role model. One day, Ryan suggested introducing Diane to his parents. He planned a dinner at an upscale restaurant to make the occasion extra special. The evening arrived, and Diane, along with Ryan and Levi, awaited his parents, who were running a bit late. The anticipation made Diane jittery. This was a significant milestone in their relationship. An elderly couple walked into the restaurant, and Ryan greeted them with a warm smile, guiding them towards their table. Diane's eyes widened in disbelief. It was Tammy and Ben Lashers, the kind-hearted couple she'd come to cherish. Her heart fluttered as she recognized them, a wave of astonishment washing over her. The realization that her lover's parents were also people she held dear was nothing short of extraordinary. The elderly couple, equally surprised, barely had time to react before Diane, Levi, and the Lashers enveloped each other in a round of joyous hugs, laughter, and happy tears. The surprise reunion left Ryan utterly perplexed until it dawned on him. Diane was the same woman his mother had been trying to introduce him to, a suggestion he had always shrugged off, confident in his choice. The irony of the situation was too amusing for words. The evening unfolded into a splendid affair, filled with animated laughter and heartfelt conversations. Tammy and Ben regaled everyone with tales from Ryan's youth, while Ryan reveled in Diane's delighted reactions. The dinner marked not just the blending of their lives, but also the convergence of past connections and future possibilities, all woven into a beautiful tapestry of shared love and joy. Diane listened intently as her future husband spoke fondly of his parents, expressing his admiration and pride in them. Levi, too, reveled in the warmth of the company, where love flowed freely towards him. As the evening wound down, after everyone had savored the sumptuous meal and shared engaging conversations, Tammy clasped Diane's hand affectionately and said, "We're so grateful to have you in our lives, dear. You've always been like a daughter to us," before enveloping her in a warm embrace. Diane was overcome with emotions. She felt a wave of happiness and gratitude for the unforgettable evening, the opportunity to meet her future in-laws, and the precious gift life had bestowed upon her, a family that she was now a part of. Following dinner, Ryan insisted on driving his parents home, brushing aside their protests. Meanwhile, Diane and Levi hailed a cab. with Ryan promising to catch up with them soon. As the taxi driver awaited his passengers, Iridian Diane bid her goodbyes to the Lashers on the street. Ryan then opened the car door for Diane and Levi, promising, "I'll be with you soon." After kissing Diane and tussling Levi's hair, he shut the door. "So, where can I take you tonight?" asked the taxi driver. Diane relayed the address, and the driver felt a stir of recognition at the sound of her voice. "No, can't be," he thought to himself as he started the car. He donned his hat and couldn't resist stealing a glance in the rearview mirror. There they were, those familiar green eyes. He fought an internal battle, but his suspicions solidified. It was indeed Diane in the backseat, the very same Diane he had abandoned pregnant 9 years ago. But now she was unrecognizable, impeccably groomed, fashionable, exuding an air of confidence that spoke volumes of her strength and resilience. It was evident that she had weathered the storm and emerged triumphant. Overcome with embarrassment and a whirlwind of emotions, Caden carried on driving, occasionally stealing glances at the woman in his rearview mirror. His gaze then drifted to the boy sitting next to her. As he maneuvered through the city's traffic, he found himself drawn to the boy's features. Eventually, he ceased looking and his eyes welled up with tears. He was transported back to the days when he was carefree, living a luxurious life on his parents' money. But life had a way of humbling people, and he was now an ordinary man, eking out a living as a cab driver. They reached their destination. As Levi got out of the cab, Diane lingered behind to settle the fare. Caden felt too embarrassed to lift his gaze from under his hat. Diane noticed the driver avoiding her gaze. At first, she thought it odd, but then she took a second look and recognized the familiar contours of his face. "Caden, is that you?" she asked. Slowly, Caden looked up, his eyes brimming with tears. For a moment they locked eyes, and Diane's heart stuttered as she remembered how a decade ago she had pleaded with those same eyes. After a brief silence, Caden managed to stammer, "Hello, Diane. I'm so sorry. You hurt me, but I survived. I wish you happiness. I've forgiven you." With those words, Diane handed Caden all the cash he had in her wallet and stepped out of the cab. She took Levi's hand and they made their way towards their home. "Mom, was that someone you know?" Levi asked, noticing that his mother had lingered in the cab. "No, sweetheart. Just someone who could use a generous tip." Wow, Don. Bravo. I haven't heard anything quite like it in ages. Where do you discover such incredible talents? What are your plans for her, by the way? Don found himself at home that day, diligently working on financial reports, when the unexpected phone call interrupted his focus. Don was momentarily puzzled by the phone call from his friend James, as his mind had been deeply immersed in analyzing various figures on the documents before him. Struggling to shift his focus, he continued to glance at the numbers while trying to make sense of his friend's words. Eventually, he managed to tear his gaze away from the papers and fully concentrate on the conversation with James. Let me tell you, Don, she's absolutely amazing. Fantastic work. What are you talking about, James? I've been stuck at home for the past 20 days, I think. I haven't found anyone to perform at the restaurant, and I'm not sure what you're referring to. Don's nervousness grew as he needed to focus on his reports, but his curiosity was piqued as well. I don't know if you're still the owner of the tune, but let me tell you this. That girl's voice is like a unicorn emerging from the mist on the other side of Adams Creek. I'd like a table reserved by default every time she performs. I've never heard anyone sing with such a sweet and melodious voice. And the songs themselves, they're entirely new to me as well. I'm thinking she or her family must be the creators. I mean, the songs are truly original. Whatever you did, I thoroughly enjoyed it. If not for work, I might practically move into your restaurant. James wrapped up the conversation and hung up the phone. Don stared at his phone for a moment, processing what he had just heard. James Mendez was not only the deputy mayor, but also an old friend of Don's. It wasn't the call itself that surprised Don, but rather the content of what James had shared with him. The last performers Don recalled booking were a folk rock band scheduled to perform for 3 weeks, including that very night. Now he found himself utterly confused and unable to make sense of the situation. To unravel the mystery, or at least attempt to grasp what exactly James had been raving about, Don decided he needed to either call the manager or visit the restaurant personally. Naturally, his curiosity got the better of him, and he opted to drive to the tune himself. Mr. Don Brooks was far from being just an ordinary restaurateur. He was an individual who was genuinely passionate about his profession and constantly sought innovative ways to make his establishment truly remarkable. His dedication and enthusiasm not only fueled his creativity, but they also played a significant role in the numerous successes he achieved in setting his restaurant apart from the rest. Don Brooks' restaurant quickly gained a reputation as one of the finest dining establishments in town. As a result, eager patrons often found themselves booking reservations weeks in advance, eager to secure a table at this much-coveted culinary hotspot. The exceptional dining experience provided by the restaurant consistently drew in both locals and visitors alike, cementing its status as a premier destination for food enthusiasts. The remarkable aspect of Mr. Brooks' approach to his restaurant was that he not only aimed to serve guests delectable meals, but also sought to delight and surprise them at every turn. He believed that an unforgettable dining experience was not just about tantalizing taste buds, but also about creating a unique atmosphere and presenting unexpected elements that would leave a lasting impression on his patrons. This commitment to innovation and excellence helped set Mr. Brooks' restaurant apart from others, making it truly extraordinary. Mr. Brooks frequently incorporated performance art into the dining experience at his restaurant, adding an element of excitement and anticipation for his patrons. He had a knack for discovering and showcasing a diverse array of incredibly talented performers, leaving guests eagerly wondering what sort of entertainment they might encounter during their next visit. At times, people affectionately referred to Mr. Brooks' restaurant as a philharmonic or theater, reflecting the seamless blend of culinary and artistic experiences that he had masterfully created. This combination not only elevated the restaurant's reputation, but also contributed to its bustling atmosphere. The Tune, as Mr. Brooks' restaurant was called, had earned a solid reputation among the high society clientele who frequented it. Don's unfulfilled aspirations of becoming an actor or singer may have played a part in his decision to dedicate a significant portion of the restaurant's space to a stage. This unique feature allowed him to blend his love for the performing arts with his passion for creating exceptional dining experiences. By doing so, Dom was able to fulfill his artistic desires while simultaneously providing a one-of-a-kind culinary and entertainment experience that attracted the attention and admiration of the city's elite. The Toon reserved its larger events featuring more elaborate performances for weekends and holidays. "Tammy, that girl is out there again." "Yeah, I saw her. We should at least get her some food." "Tammy, she's singing again. Did you see the crowd last time?" "What do you want me to do?" "Nothing really, just thought I'd let you know to watch the clouds." "It's gonna pour soon. Look how she's dressed." "Stop beating about the bush, Kevin. Tell me what to do." The manager of the Toon and his assistant stood on the porch, observing a 12-year-old girl singing at the intersection of two busy streets. This wasn't their first time noticing the girl. She had been there on several occasions, standing and singing just as she was doing now. However, they couldn't actually hear her voice due to the distance and the constant hum of passing cars. Half an hour later, the noise outside had subsided, and both Tammy and Kevin could finally hear the girl's enchanting singing. "So, what do we do?" Kevin asked as a few heavy raindrops splattered on the ground. "What do you mean, what do we do?" "Go get her, man," Tammy urged. "I hope Mr. Brooks won't get mad at us," Kevin expressed before dashing out into the street. "He won't be mad at all. He won't find better managers than us," Tammy said with a smile. Kevin had only recently started working at the restaurant, but he was already brimming with creative ideas. As an easygoing guy, he quickly built a strong rapport with his staff. 5 minutes later, after the rain had ceased, Kevin returned with the girl in tow. Tammy's eyes widened in shock as she saw how drenched the young singer was. "You're all wet." "Hold on, we'll get you something to change into." "Kevin, go fetch something hot from the kitchen for the kid." Tammy found her old uniform. The girl was quite tall, but she was too skinny. "Let's tie it up here, pull it up a little bit here." "Look at you now, pretty." The girl smiled hesitantly. Tammy seated her at a table. "Help yourself. So, I can't promise you anything yet, but you can try singing here. Whatever you get tipped is yours. Deal?" The girl nodded and asked, "Are the owners okay with that?" "You're good. Mr. Brooks is a cool guy, and if something happens, Kevin and I will be responsible. So don't worry, okay? What's your name, by the way?" "Dorothy." "What a wonderful name. Are you from around here? Because I've never heard anything like your singing before. You don't have to answer if you don't want to." Dorothy looked up and quickly spoke up. "No, it's all right. I can tell you my story. So, my mom and I moved here recently. Then my mom got sick." When she said the last sentence, her voice cracked and she couldn't hold back her emotions. Tammy placed a hand on her shoulder. "It's okay. We can talk about it later, whenever you feel like it. By the way, we've got this wonderful guitar player. If you want, he can accompany your singing." Dorothy shrugged her shoulders and said, "Well, I don't know. I've never tried singing to a guitar." "I guess you can try now." Tammy was more worried than Dorothy. Kevin was also bustling about, setting up the mic and a chair for Dorothy. The audience watched it all unfold in the hall. Finally, everything was ready. The guitar player sat in the corner of the stage. Without a mic for now, he said he would join in if it worked out. As the music unfolded, Tammy realized that Dorothy's singing wasn't ordinary at all. It was something she had never heard before. It had to have a name or some sort of classification, but Tammy couldn't quite put her finger on what it was. The song Dorothy sang was entirely unfamiliar to Tammy. It felt like a captivating story, weaving an enchanting narrative that seemed to transcend time. The melody carried a sense of antiquity, as if it were a long-forgotten treasure, resurfacing to bewitch the listeners with its haunting beauty. As the song came to an end, the room was enveloped in absolute silence for a few moments. Then, as if a spell had been broken, everyone in the hall rose to their feet. The sound of thunderous applause filled the air as the audience expressed their admiration and awe for Dorothy's mesmerizing performance. Several audience members, moved by Dorothy's captivating performance, approached the stage and placed money at her feet. Among the bills, there were some particularly large denominations, reflecting the deep impression she had made on their listeners. Dorothy glanced at the money with a frightened expression, then shifted her gaze to Tammy. Sensing her unease, Tammy approached Dorothy with a warm, reassuring smile, offering her comfort and support. "They're yours. You've earned them," Tammy said. Dorothy accepted the money. "I can buy some medicine for Mom." "Sure. Do you have just one song?" "No, I know a lot of songs. My grandma taught me. These are all her songs. She composed them all herself." An hour later, Tammy guided Dorothy down from the stage. "I know more songs." "I think you need to take a break, honey. Have some tea, get something to eat, and if you want, you can go back and sing more," Tammy suggested, keeping Dorothy's well-being in mind. After the break, Dorothy resumed singing, this time accompanied by the guitar. With its gentle and delicate melodies, the guitar complemented her voice perfectly, elevating her songs to the status of true masterpieces. The audience was captivated once again, utterly spellbound by the magic of Dorothy's performance. Tammy listened intently to Dorothy's performance, her eyes fixated on the young girl as she sang. The song that Dorothy was performing at that moment was the most extraordinary of all. The melody was intricate and complex, with a unique rhythm that Tammy had never heard before. As she listened, Tammy felt as if she were being transported to another world, one that existed beyond the confines of time and space. For some inexplicable reason, Tammy found herself becoming emotional as she listened to Dorothy's captivating performance. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she struggled to keep them from spilling over. The beauty and power of Dorothy's voice and the melody were so overwhelming that Tammy couldn't help but feel moved by the sheer intensity of it all. She took a deep breath, trying to hold back the tears, and continued to listen, transfixed by the magic unfolding before her. At first, Tammy didn't quite comprehend why she was feeling so emotional, but as she listened to Dorothy's performance, something clicked in her mind, and she realized that the song was an ancient lullaby. The melody was so hauntingly beautiful that it had touched a deep chord within her, evoking memories and emotions that she had long forgotten. As Don drove up to the restaurant, he noticed that the parking lot was unusually full of cars. At first he was surprised, but then he quickly realized that his restaurant was always bustling with activity. He parked his car and made his way towards the entrance, eager to see what was happening inside. Don took a moment to enjoy the fresh, post-rain air outside before heading inside. But as he approached the entrance, he changed his mind and decided to take a detour, opting instead to head to the patio. As he made his way there, he could hear the sound of someone singing on the stage inside. Curiosity piqued, Don quickened his pace, eager to see who was performing. As a restaurant owner who had always been on the lookout for talented performers, Don had developed a keen sense of what made a great singer. He couldn't help but notice the strong, powerful voice of the young girl on stage, and he found himself becoming more and more entranced by her performance. Suddenly, something about her singing made Don freeze in his tracks. His heart started pounding as a thought crossed his mind, and he couldn't shake off the feeling that he had heard that voice before. Don couldn't believe his ears. He took a few more steps closer to the stage, straining to hear the girl's voice more clearly. As she continued to sing, he felt a sense of familiarity wash over him. He knew he had heard that song before, but it had been a long time since he had last heard it. He couldn't see the girl's face since she was standing sideways to him, but the more he listened, the more convinced he became that he had heard that song before. As he reflected on his memories, he realized that the person who had sung that song to him before was a very kind and gentle girl who had mentioned that her mother had taught her to sing those songs. The memory flooded back to him, and he felt a deep sense of nostalgia and longing. It was as if a part of his past that he had long forgotten had suddenly resurfaced, brought to life once again through the voice of this talented young girl. His mind drifted back to a time when he and his friends had set out on a journey into the Alaskan wilderness. He remembered the excitement and anticipation of the trip, the thrill of adventure that had spurred them on. It had been a time of youth, of carefree abandon, and of the kind of wildness that can only be found in the vast, untamed expanse of the natural world. He remembered one particular day when they had to navigate down a river in boats. The water was choppy and treacherous, and the boats were barely holding together as they bounced and rocked along the current. The current had swept him away, making it difficult for him to steer his boat out of its grasp. He had struggled against the water, his muscles straining as he tried to stay afloat, and for a moment he had felt a sense of panic rise within him. He was carried along the current, helpless to steer himself away from the waterfall that loomed ahead. And then, as he went over the edge, everything had become a blur of motion and sensation. He had felt himself flipping upside down, his heart pounding in his chest as he tumbled head over heels towards the water below. After hitting the water, he had seen a flash of light in his eyes, and then everything had gone dark. He had woken up in a small hut, surrounded by unfamiliar faces and sounds. He felt disoriented and confused, his body aching and sore from the fall. And then, slowly, he had become aware of a young girl standing beside him, her face full of concern and kindness. She had explained to him that she was a local from a nearby village, and that she and her family had found him unconscious and pulled him from the river. It was a simple village with its dozen or so houses nestled amidst the rugged landscape of the Alaskan wilderness, and he remembered the family that had taken him in, the old mother who had welcomed him with open arms, and the young girl who had nursed him back to health. When Don hit the surface of the water, he also hit a rock. That's when he had lost consciousness. His body was tossed about by the swirling water, his skin scraped raw against the rough surfaces of the rocks and branches that lined the riverbed. The gentle touch of the girl's hands tended to his wounds, her soothing voice calm as she spoke words of comfort and encouragement. The girl had been just a few years younger than him, but she had taken charge of his care with a maturity beyond her years. She had applied herbs and poultices to his wounds and had nursed him back to health with a steady diet of fish and berries gathered from the surrounding forest. Dawn had been touched by the kindness and generosity of this stranger who had taken him into her home and treated him with such care and concern. Sometimes the girl sang him lullabies. The gentle melodies had soothed his troubled mind and helped him to relax into a deep and restful sleep. He realized now that there was something universal and timeless about lullabies. They had the power to comfort and calm even in the most difficult of circumstances. As he lay in the small hut, Don had had ample time to reflect on his life and the choices he had made up until that point. He had been a successful businessman, but he had also been consumed by a restless ambition that left little room for anything else. Now, lying there in the care of this young girl and her mother, he realized how much he had been missing. He had been so focused on his own success and achievement that he had forgotten the value of human connection and the importance of living a life that was guided by compassion and kindness. A week had passed since the accident, and finally he began to feel better. With renewed strength, he ventured outside and was immediately captivated by the beauty of the natural world that surrounded him. The lush green trees, vibrant flowers, and crystal clear streams were breathtaking, and he couldn't help but marvel at the wonders of nature. As he explored the area, he noticed the subtle details that made this place so special. The gentle rustling of leaves in the breeze, the chirping of birds in the distance, and the sweet fragrance of wildflowers all contributed to the serene atmosphere that enveloped him. Don couldn't help but be captivated by the beauty of the girl who had taken care of him and nursed him back to health. As she went about her work around the house, he found himself stealing glances at her, admiring her grace and poise. Her long flowing hair shimmered in the sunlight, and her eyes sparkled with a kindness and warmth that Don found irresistible. He watched as she moved with effortless ease, tending to the plants in the garden and preparing meals in the kitchen. Don felt a sense of gratitude towards her that went beyond words. It wasn't just that she had taken care of him when he was sick, but it was also the way she had done it, with such care, compassion, and dedication. He knew that he would never be able to repay her for what she had done for him. As Don and Elsie spent time together in the village, they got to know each other better. One day, while they were sitting by the river, Elsie told Don her name. He couldn't help but chuckle a little, and she asked him what was so amusing. Don explained that he had never heard the name Elsie before and that it sounded funny to him. Elsie smiled and asked Don if he liked any other names. Don thought for a moment and said that he liked the name Dorothy. Elsie was surprised but pleased with Don's answer. She thought that Dorothy was a lovely name and asked him why he liked it. Don told her that it reminded him of his grandmother, who had been a kind and gentle woman with a warm heart. The attraction between the young ones had been growing stronger each day, and eventually they gave in to their feelings. They spent the night together, wrapped in each other's arms, and lost in the passion of the moment. However, their moment of bliss was interrupted the following day when Don's friends finally arrived. After searching for him for over 2 weeks, they had tracked him down to the small village where he had been staying. Don was overjoyed to see his friends, and he rushed to greet them, eager to catch up on all that had happened during his time away. However, as he introduced him to the girl who had taken care of him, he sensed the tension in the air. It didn't take long for his friends to notice the closeness between Don and the girl, and they couldn't help but feel a little suspicious. They had always been protective of Don, and they didn't want to see him hurt. The girl was indeed sad to see Don go, and his promise to come back and take her with him had given her hope for a better future. She believed in his promise, and she eagerly awaited his return. However, as days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months, the girl began to lose hope. She heard nothing from Don, and the memory of their time together began to fade. Meanwhile, Don had returned to his busy life in the city, overwhelmed with work and chores. As time passed, he found himself getting caught up in the hustle and bustle of city life, and he gradually forgot about his promise to the girl. Don had been standing on the patio, lost in thought, as he listened to a song that reminded him of Elsie. As the song ended, Don walked into the restaurant and headed straight to his office. He sat down at his desk, staring at the computer screen, but his mind was elsewhere. Tammy noticed him and walked over to him. "Mr. Brooks, what a surprise to see you here today. We weren't expecting you." "Expect me any day, Tammy." "That girl, can you ask her to come to my office? I want to know where she knows these songs from." "I was actually planning to ask her the same question. I've never heard anything like it." Dorothy sat in front of Don, trembling with fear. As he looked into her eyes, he couldn't help but cough uncontrollably for a few seconds. They were the most stunning yellowish eyes he had ever seen. The only person he knew with such captivating eyes was Elsie. Finally, Don found the strength and courage to smile at Dorothy, trying to ease her fears. "I only look scary. I'm actually quite kind. It's nice to meet you. Can you tell me a little more about yourself?" Dorothy looked relieved and began to relax a bit as she shared her story. But as soon as Don heard her name, he froze and looked at her with a mix of shock and disbelief. Tammy, who had been silently observing everything, stepped forward to ask if Don was okay. After a few moments, Don managed to compose himself enough to ask the question that had been weighing on his mind. "What's your mother's name, kid?" Dorothy answered without hesitation. "My mother's name is Elsie. She's in the hospital sick and doesn't know I'm here. Grandma always wanted us to move to this town for some reason. When she passed away a few months ago, Mom and I moved here." Tammy was getting more and more confused as the conversation unfolded. Don's head was getting lower and lower as he struggled to process the information he was hearing. He couldn't believe what he was thinking, but he had a feeling that Dorothy was his daughter. He asked himself why he hadn't known about her all these years if she was indeed his daughter. As Don struggled with his thoughts and emotions, Tammy looked at him with concern and asked, "Is everything okay, Mr. Brooks?" Don didn't say anything. It turned out that Elsie had never stopped waiting for Don all these years, because he had promised to come back. Don lifted his head and asked Dorothy, "Where's your mom right now?" Dorothy replied, "She was taken to the hospital, and we got evicted from the room we had been renting. The doctors told us we don't have medical insurance, and they won't treat her." Don felt a wave of sadness and guilt wash over him. Elsie and Dorothy had moved to the town 6 months ago. They rented a small apartment and everything seemed to be going well. Elsie worked long hours as a dishwasher in a nearby restaurant trying to make ends meet. Meanwhile, Dorothy used her beautiful voice to earn some extra money by singing in the streets. Initially, they were getting by and had sufficient funds for food. However, as the rent continued to rise, their income struggled to keep pace. They faced difficulty in qualifying for other rental properties, as landlords typically demand the tenants to have an income 3 or 4 times the monthly rent. Moreover, their previous eviction further complicated matters, as many property owners were hesitant to rent to them due to their tainted rental history. As a result, Elsie and Dorothy found themselves in a challenging situation, struggling to secure a new and affordable place to call home. Don rose from his chair and glanced at Tammy. "I believe she's at the public hospital. We should go. Immediately." Don hesitated for a moment as he approached Dorothy. Then, grabbing her hand, he led her out. Tammy watched him intently from beneath her hat as he passed by. Don instructed Dorothy to wait outside before returning to his office and closing the door. "Why are you staring at me like that, Tammy?" "No, it's not what you're thinking. I had no idea. How could I have known? You know me, right? Am I heartless? Tell me." Tammy looked up at Don and grinned. "You've got ink on your nose." She burst into laughter but quickly grew serious. Gazing up at Don, she inquired, "What are you planning to do? I hope you're happy about the situation." Don sighed and responded, "Tammy, this is precisely why I've never let you leave the restaurant. You know how to ask the tough questions." He thought for a moment before continuing, "Ultimately, yes, I am happy. But my feelings are mixed at the moment, especially because of Elsie. I don't know the extent of her condition." By the time Don and Dorothy arrived at the hospital, night had fallen. Unfortunately, due to Elsie's lack of medical insurance and her inability to provide a deposit for additional tests, the doctors could only keep her stable. That was the extent of the care they were able to offer. Dorothy waited patiently in the hallway while Don entered the ward and caught sight of Elsie. His heart skipped a beat upon seeing her lying on the bed, asleep and unaware of his presence. He stood there taking in her appearance as long-lost memories came flooding back to him. Despite the dark circles under her eyes and her frail figure due to malnutrition, Elsie's natural beauty shone through, not allowing her illness to overshadow her. Don slowly approached the bed and sat down at the edge. Taking her hand in his, he gazed at her face for a long time. A wave of sadness washed over him, and he fought back the urge to cry. Don managed to hold back the tears that threatened to spill over and blur his vision. Instead, an uncomfortable lump formed in his throat, creating a burning sensation. As he closed his eyes, Dorothy's face appeared before him, leaving little room for doubt that she was indeed his daughter. The striking resemblance between them was undeniable, further solidifying his suspicions. Don's emotions finally got the better of him, and a few teardrops fell onto Elsie's hand, betraying the overwhelming feelings that had been welling up inside him. Elsie's eyes, heavy from the sedatives, slowly opened as she felt the tears on her hand. A slightly tilted head with tear-filled eyes gazed at her, revealing the depth of emotion in that moment. Elsie furrowed her brows in a visible frown, her groggy mind attempting to make sense of the situation and understand the emotional scene before her. "I'm so sorry, Elsie," Don whispered, his voice laden with regret. It was evident that Elsie was too weak to immediately respond, as she struggled to process what she had heard. Or perhaps it was her generous heart that prompted her to simply offer a faint, forgiving smile in response to Don's heartfelt apology. "It's okay," she whispered softly. "No, it's not okay. I'm sorry, Elsie. I didn't keep my promise," Don said through his tears, which were flowing even more freely now. Despite her own tears, Elsie continued to smile, and in that moment, her smile and tears only served to enhance her beauty, adding a tender warmth to her expression. "Please take care of Dorothy," Elsie implored. A few minutes later, doctors entered the room and began preparing to move Elsie. Dorothy, overwhelmed with emotion, sobbed loudly as she buried her face into her mother's shoulder. Gently, Elsie stroked her daughter's hair, offering what comfort she could in her heart-wrenching moment. "Everything's gonna be okay. Mr. Brooks promised you will be taken care of," Elsie reassured her daughter. "Mommy, I love you so much. Promise me you won't leave me alone. Promise me, please." "You won't be alone, baby. You'll have a—" At that moment, Elsie glanced at Don, who looked at Dorothy with eyes filled with guilt. Dorothy's gaze shifted between Don and Elsie, then back to Don. She carefully studied his features for a while. During this process, her facial expressions transitioned from doubt to realization and then back to doubt before the truth finally dawned on her. In that moment, her expression gradually changed from sympathy for her mother to visible anger directed towards her father. Dawn gazed at Dorothy with sympathy, understanding the complexity of her emotions. He desperately wanted to offer her a comforting hug in that moment, but he held back, allowing her the space to process the situation and decide how to move forward. "I'm sorry, kiddo. I didn't know about you at all. If I had known you existed, I would have done everything in my power, even give my life to be there for you. Please forgive me," Dawn pleaded, his voice full of sincerity and regret. Elsie took her daughter's hand and gently calmed her down. "Honey, your father has a good heart. We were both young and—" She trailed off, acknowledging that their past decisions and circumstances had led them to this point, but emphasizing Dawn's good intentions. As the doctors wheeled Elsie out and prepared to place her in the ambulance, Dorothy asked Dawn, "Where are they taking her?" "I've arranged everything at a private clinic. She's going to be treated, and she'll be back with us soon, Dorothy." When the ambulance left, Dawn said to Dorothy, "Let's go home?" He waited for her reaction. She stood motionless, and Dawn opened the passenger door of his truck for her without saying anything. Dorothy remained there, emotionless and exhausted from the day's revelations. She hardly even noticed what Dawn had been doing all this time. Dawn approached her and stood very close to her. He opened his arms as if asking for permission to hug her. He took another small step towards her, and she slowly leaned her head on his chest. Finally, for the first time, Dawn hugged his daughter. He felt an incredible sense of happiness and contentment knowing that this girl, with her silky hair and soft shoulders, was his own daughter. He could feel a surge of energy flowing into him, making him feel like a proud father. "Thank you for giving me a second chance," he whispered. It took some time for Dorothy to adjust to living in a stranger's house, especially since that stranger was also her father. But as the days went by, they began to build a relationship and understand one another, slowly forging a bond that had been missing for so long. The day following Elsie's transfer to a cozy private clinic, Dawn paid her a visit. It was a lovely day with a refreshing breeze that came after a night of heavy rainfall. Dawn's heart was brimming with joy and satisfaction, as in just one day he found himself a family. Before driving to the clinic, Dawn decided to stop by the restaurant. As always, it was teeming with customers, but he managed to pull the manager Tammy and her assistant Kevin aside for a brief conversation. "Who came up with the idea for Dorothy to sing here?" Dawn inquired, looking at Tammy and Kevin. They exchanged concerned glances before Tammy spoke up. "Mr. Brooks, I apologize. It was our idea, both Kevin's and mine. We thought Dorothy had a beautiful voice and—" Tammy's explanation was cut short as Dawn interrupted her. "So you're telling me it wasn't one of you, but both of you came up with the idea together?" "We did. I kept telling Tammy we should bring Dorothy over. I'm so sorry, Mr. Brooks, if that was against the restaurant's rules," Kevin admitted, being a recent addition to the restaurant's team. Dawn stared at them intently. His stern expression slowly transformed into a smile. "Relax, both of you. You did great. Have I told you how much I don't want you to leave?" He directed the last part at Tammy and grinned. "Man, you scared us, Mr. Brooks." Tammy sighed with relief and started to laugh. "Okay, guys. I don't usually do this, but this is a special occasion. Follow me." Dawn led them to his office and wrote out 2 checks worth $20,000 each for Tammy and Kevin. They exchanged surprised looks at first, but then began dancing in excitement. All right, guys. Back to work. It's the start of a busy day." Upon arriving at the clinic, the doctors provided Dawn with an update on Elsie's condition. He peered through the window into her room and saw 3 medical professionals attentively caring for her. Dawn felt hopeful that Elsie would soon recover. Carrying a large bouquet of flowers, he entered the room where Elsie was resting. The nurses, noticing Dawn, decided to leave them alone for some private time. Dawn gently placed the bouquet on a nearby stand and took a seat next to Elsie's bed. "How are you feeling, Elsie?" "I'm feeling much better. Thank you for everything." "Elsie, thank you for everything. I've never even realized that you were the reason I'm still alive and here. I've never even properly thanked you. I'm going to fix it now, if you let me." A month later, Elsie was getting discharged from the clinic. She looked so beautiful and healthy. Tammy and Kevin were busy decorating the restaurant for the special dinner tonight. Dorothy was nervous. She was getting prepared to sing on stage to her parents. It was a beautiful day for everyone. Elsie and Dawn danced in the middle of the hall to Elsie's beautiful and melodic singing. When the evening drew to its end, Tammy approached Dawn as he was standing on the patio and smoking. Dawn was looking into the distance, immersed in thoughts. "So, why did you never go back?" Dawn didn't look at Tammy. He was amused at her question. "Tammy, did I tell you I didn't want you to leave the restaurant?" Tammy smiled. She knew she hit the nail on the head with her question, but he didn't say anything to her. The reason why Dawn never went back to Elsie was quite simple, but he never talked about it to anyone. He wanted to keep it a secret because it might ruin everything. The reason he never went back was because he loved Elsie so much that he wanted to forget her. She was so beautiful that he was scared of losing her. He knew now that it was foolish to think of it that way, but that's how he felt back then. He was young and scared about his feelings for her, but when he realized that his actions had consequences, he decided to try work things out. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he was happy that he had a beautiful daughter and a potential wife.